Okay, great. So thank you everyone for joining us today for the XCAP meeting, our first special Zoom meeting. A very special thank you to all of the City of Palo Alto staff that are helping make this happen. There's a cast of many folks who you will see up here who are helping us behind the scenes to help get this done. So we really appreciate that. I guess I will open it up to Chantal so we can do the roll call.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Nyack. Gregory Braille will be delayed, but attending the meeting later. Phil Burton. Just unmute really quickly or wave.
Here, back to mute.
Tony Carrasco.
Here.
In-Young Cho. Megan Kahn.
Here.
Larry Klein. He's getting to the unmute. Okay, he waved a hand. Patricia Lau. Adina Levin. Nadia Nick.
Here.
Keith Reckdahl.
Here.
David Shin.
Here.
Carrie Templeton.
Here.
Awesome. You have a quorum present.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our first item on the agenda is going to be oral communication. Any member of the public wishing to speak will have 2 minutes. And I am going to allow Sylvia Starlack, who's one of the City of Palo Alto transportation staff, who's helping us with this virtual part of the meeting, be the one who guides this portion. So Sylvia, I'll turn it over to you so you can explain what folks need to do so they can raise their hand to speak.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair Nyack. Any members of the public wishing to speak now, if you could please digitally raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9 if dialing by phone. Okay, calling once more. There were some people who were practicing raising their hands. Anyone interested in speaking?
Hello.
Okay, it looks like we've got one
Okay,
person.
looks like we have one. All right. All right. Oh, I can't.
Hello.
Sorry. Mohammed Hadidi, you can speak.
Yes. Okay. So I live on Churchill Avenue, and I just wanted to reiterate our opinion that we are strongly in favor of closure of Churchill, either as the best among solutions, none of them is perfect, or as a phase one of a phase approach in which we first implement the mitigations that are have been suggested for Oregon Expressway and Embarcadero, and then see whether the results of the traffic study pan out, which seem to indicate that this mitigation would be enough in order to carry, basically have no problems with traffic. So that's all I wanted to say. Hopefully, this will be the recommendation that will come out of XCAP. And I have sent, my wife and I have sent an email to members of the XCAP, basically stating the same opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment. The next person with their hand up is Cathy Jordan. Sorry, I got the wrong. Sorry, technical difficulties here.
That's correct.
Okay. Cathy Jordan, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to say that I and others would very much object to seeing Churchill Avenue be closed in any way, and would like to bring up that this whole process was begun because Caltrain talked about it would be doubling its ridership and increasing its service, and thus grade crossings would need to be addressed in the cities along its route. Currently, Caltrain service has been decreased by more than half and its ridership is down 90%. Thus, the reason for this process about considering grade crossings just no longer exists. It's unclear when it may come back as something that needs to be addressed. Funding for all of this related items in their business plan is also greatly in question. As we know, sales taxes and other streams of revenue have decreased. And so I think that while, of course, everyone's efforts here in continuing to discuss this are noble, however, I think this is premature to be discussing closing Churchill or other things when the reason for this no longer exists and it's unclear when it will come back into existence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker with initials LL, you may speak. You'll need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
I'd like to second what Cathy Jordan said. I think that the closing of Churchill is being pursued by a few neighbors on Churchill at a great cost to the rest of the city and to the high school and its community. And especially with tax revenues going down, I think this is not a good use of city funds to basically make a private neighborhood for the benefit of a few families on Churchill and at a great cost to the rest of the taxpayers in the city. And I agree with Cathy that since traffic on Caltrain is going down, and this is something that we can't afford to do right now, that this should be postponed. The Churchill crossing should be postponed, and we should wait and see how things work out.
Okay, the next speaker is Jason Stinson. You may, it's your turn to speak.
Wow, that went quicker than I thought it would. I had more time. Yeah, so my name is Jason Stinson. Thanks for letting us talk. This is quite interesting way to do it. But on particularly with respect to the Churchill closure and that sort of stuff, I think my biggest perspective, I'm, by the way, a proponent of shutting down Churchill, but I think regardless, I'm a big fan of using data and focusing on the data and focusing on the studies. I feel like I'm kind of disappointed in the community that we've resorted to signs and appeals to emotional things, that we put signs illegally on neighbors' yards and illegally on public property to try to use anecdotes and appeals to emotion. I think ultimately this decision is a complex, it's a hard decision. We shouldn't, fall into the trap that at a national level we have where we're not actually using science and data to look at it, that we're just trying to talk past each other and use emotion. We should look at the studies. I think it's pretty clear from the studies that Embarcadero needs to be fixed, full stop. And that's a relatively inexpensive thing for us to do. Whether we close Churchill or not should be based on the studies. And it's interesting that, when the last study came out and it said that the newest proposal to keep Churchill open was worse, that's when the signs came out. That's when they illegally went onto yards. That's when the emotional stuff came out. I really think we should focus on the studies and what the studies say and what the data says, and not resort to, unfortunately, what we're doing at a national level. We've been doing for a number of years now, but our community is different, and I'm hopeful that on a complex issue like this, that we really look at what the information says from a study and a data perspective, and not the emotional opinions of different neighbors. Thanks.
Great.
Okay, that concludes our public speakers.
Thank you, Sylvia. Okay, that went, I'm impressed. That went well, guys. Well done. So so I want to thank all of you who've connected. I can see that there's 29 attendees, which is a huge amount of folks considering the pandemic that's among us, and that this is an issue that to some may seem like, why are we still talking about this? But I appreciate everyone still staying engaged even in this difficult time. The next item that we have is our work plan and estimated timeline updates in light of COVID. So this is going to be the XCAP's chance and the public's chance to sort of weigh in on where are we and sort of what's happening at this point in the process and kind of what's happening with the city. So I wanted to give our city manager, Ed Chicada, the first few minutes to kind of update us on anything that he feels is relevant for us to know from a council's perspective, from the city perspective, and then we'll open up to discussion from the rest of the XCAP. So Ed, I'll let you take it.
And Chair Nayak, there's also a staff presentation to go with Mr. Chicada's comments. Philip Cami will make that.
Yes, so I'll just take a minute and provide a little context. I think that the comments, and in fact, just even the orientation of this meeting is a really important step for us. It's a milestone. And as members of the community know, the City Council over the course of the last few weeks started from the baby step of just even trying to get a Zoom meeting, and we were part of this national phenomenon of Zoom bombing and organizing our meetings in a way that ensured that we were able to both conduct business as well as more and more facilitate public input to our community meetings. And I think the theme of baby steps is absolutely in order in way of describing everything we're doing right now. It's almost like learning to walk again by virtue of now having meetings virtually, as well as talking about topics more and more, turning from the emergency of the next 24 hours to looking a week ahead, and now looking a few weeks ahead, and more recognizing that we are in a period of getting oriented to a new normal, and that in many ways we're not going to go back to the way things were for quite some time. And so this meeting in and of itself, I think, is a good example of that. And where in our thinking, both in terms of just having meetings, as well as now talking more and more prospectively about long-term initiatives, whether in our case, over the last few days, we've been talking a lot about the next fiscal year budget and some immediate actions that will be necessary in order to adjust our programs and our resource expectations around what the economic realities are going to be over the next 12 plus months. That again, today's discussion is a good milestone for us to think about simultaneously both the baby steps of just having meetings to then what does it mean in terms of longer term initiatives, long-term needs, and some of the variables that come into play there. So with that, our team has actually been doing quite a bit of work over the last month. And it's hard to imagine it's only been a little more than a month since we've been sheltering in place. So I'd really like to ask Philip to chime in and give us an overview. And then I know through our agenda, we'll talk about some of the substance of what's been happening.
Thank you. Philip Cami, Chief Transportation Official, joining the discussion here. I'm going to share my screen so that everybody can see this item, especially when we get into the hopefully I'm going to share it. Can everybody see that? Looking for nods. Yeah, okay. All right. I see you. Connor, I need you to leave here, sweetie. Connor, out of here, out of here. I apologize. No, out of here right now.
That's another part of how our meetings have been going recently. Someone said that all of a sudden your coworkers' personal lives are now important to you. And everyone on the city council, as well as I think the Palo Alto community, has now met Connor. And he's an integral part of our civic life. So thank you.
All right. For some reason, I thought that I freed myself of him. He went for a bike ride, but he's back right when I'm about to talk. So, so I'll hide my video now. But so as you're all aware, the XCAP hasn't met since February due to concerns around COVID-19. And so this item provides an opportunity to analyze the progress that's happened and to look at the remaining work that's ahead. And so I want to preface this conversation by providing the context for why staff believes that the XCAP meetings can and should continue, especially given all of the work that's been done and is either completed or will be completed soon. First off, Caltrain continues with the electrification of its fleet, and the photos of the poles that you see in page 2, actually, maybe I can go to that page. These are photos of the poles that were recently installed, I believe, last week near Churchill. And when I had my video up, you saw me standing in front of one of Caltrain's trains that's near completion as well. That's part of their electric fleet. And that was something that actually Caltrain, through their CalMod updates, provided yesterday. They look pretty awesome, I think. And despite the current unusual circumstances, Caltrain has not presented any plans to halt the electrification project or to reduce planned frequencies. So another thing that's needs to be considered is that the city of Palo Alto should really try and have a shovel-ready project to be well positioned to take advantage of any funding opportunities. In addition to the Measure B pod and the other typical funding opportunities, I want to share that during the last economic recession, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARRA, provided funding for shovel-ready infrastructure projects. And I could see that type of thing happening under this situation as well. So Palo Alto really should be positioned well to act on funding opportunities, and will not be until we have an actual project. And the last one is one that we're kind of working through today, which is the city's learned how to efficiently conduct virtual meetings. Here we are doing it. And the city council has been doing it every week, and we've had quite a few meetings. Actually, most of my day is spent in virtual meetings. And while today will be a little bit of a learning process and trying to figure out how exactly to make this group work, I think that it's going to probably get smoother as we progress with it. And also on the same subject, I just want to share that AECOM is going to be sharing later in this discussion a tool that they have for conducting virtual town halls, which we can talk about a bit in the in how we engage the public, which is one of the things. So with that, I'll briefly go into the draft schedule, which should take up most of your screen here. And it's broken up into 3 different areas, and shows the work that remains and the incorporated new ideas. And the first section of that is the estimated remaining work for the XCAP, which shows meetings in May to cover analysis. And the key tasks that don't have dates yet in the sections are the deliberations and final report, which is to be determined based on this discussion today. In our discussion with the chair and vice chair, they preferred to only show meetings through May and to leave this open for discussion today. The second section is meetings. The estimated technical meetings regarding the new Meadow Charleston alternative can occur starting in the next couple of weeks, potentially even next week. The current schedule only shows tentative virtual XCAP meetings, as I mentioned before, occurring through May, with the potential for XCAP meetings continuing to occur in June. And this schedule also shows council meetings. However, note that the work plan and the AECOM amendment likely need to be moved and probably will be brought to council at a later date in May. It's currently shown to be on the May 4th, but that's very unlikely due to the critical budget discussions that are occurring and also our timeline for getting this ready to go to council. And as I mentioned, the virtual town halls can potentially occur in May. And after I finish going through the schedule overview, AECOM can share this concept. Hopefully they have it ready to queue up as soon as I'm done talking here. And expanded community engagement will occur following the town halls and leading up to council deliberation of a preferred alternative. And council decisions on preferred alternatives are tentatively scheduled for June or August. Showing June on here, but it actually says in the text there, June or August. And then the third section is analysis. And this section shows that many of the cities and AECOM's analysis and engineering work is nearing completion or will be nearing completion by mid-May. And with that, I'll turn it over to AECOM. I think I have to stop sharing here so that they can show their virtual town hall concept.
Hi, I'm Millette Litzinger, and I'm the project manager for AECOM. And I am going to share my screen so that I can show you. Actually, just give me a moment here. I want to make sure I pick the right one. All right, so I think you should be seeing my screen now. As we've, Phil kind of has noted that we do want to plan for some virtual community meetings. We have done a robust community outreach effort throughout the project, the life of the project, and we want to continue to do that. And AECOM has this consulting tool that they've used to conduct virtual meetings for larger communities and to gather feedback. And as you hopefully can see on this screen here, there's, this would be, I'm gonna just kind of scroll around. What you're seeing here can be customized in any way. This is just a demo slide where you can, you kind of scroll around the room and visit where you want. And I think for those of you that have attended some of our community meetings, you know, we have a lot of exhibit boards and video stations and technical input areas related to noise and other topics. So what we would do is virtually kind of recreate these areas in this type of format. Just to show you some examples, usually the site has some sort of welcome page where it'll tell you about the project and what's going on. And then each of these icons relates to each of the boards that are around the room. So we would load those. You can look at them, zoom in, you can scroll through them, multiple ones at a time. And then there's also the capabilities to load videos, which we could do here. We have the animations that we use typically at the community meetings to illustrate the alternatives. This is one area we could do that. There's also a photo gallery. Some of our boards also provide example pictures of other projects in the area that are similar. So this is another function that we could use. And similarly for more of our engineering drawings, if we wanted, we could in many ways recreate the rooms that we have done at previous community meetings, but doing that virtually. Another good feature of this is that there are multiple ways that we could gather feedback. The one is this, we could schedule, let's say, an office hour where we're going to be, staff would be online from 4 to 5 one day or whatever time we set up. And the people that came and visited the site could enter their information and submit a question, and we could do a live response. And the site exists on a server and it can remain live for as long as you want. So it could also, for someone that maybe missed the live chat, they could come back another time. And then there is a another way over here that you could do to submit your feedback. And maybe let's say it wasn't a time where there was a live chat going on. You could still submit your feedback through this icon here, and it could all be exported into an Excel spreadsheet where we could likely take that information and maybe add it to some frequently asked questions or things like that to post the response. And you would have all of the community meetings and town halls that we planned all the information here and available for the community to view at their convenience and provide their feedback. So, I think that's pretty much the little demo tour.
Great. Thank you for that, Millette.
And let's see, Philip, did you want to make any comments? If not, I'd perhaps close it out.
Thanks. Sorry, I just had to step out briefly. No, I don't really have any further comments other than, you know, we just wanted to give you a sense of the work that's being completed and then the next steps to get us to the finish line.
Yeah, so if I could then just comment to close out this piece of just the staff report, that I asked Millette to share that visual and for specifically the reason to be able to visualize what some of these tools could be brought to our effort in the next phase. It's not to replace the need for and the value of in-person presentations, as well as not to assume that we're going to be in this virtual shelter-in-place situation for an extended period, but we do know it's going to last for some time. In fact, just today, we had a briefing with the county health officer as well as the county executive officer, and we specifically were trying to get a sense of when and if the shelter-in-place order would be extended. And it was really difficult to get them to answer it straight, other than to talk about circumstances under which you know, things that do need to be in place. And you've heard about the testing, the ability to contact tracing, and all of the various elements that would be important for us to have in place before we start loosening on shelter-in-place order and returning to what I like to refer to as civic life. So understanding that, we did want to give you the chance to perhaps just visualize some of the tools that could be used in our next phase. And in fact, as I mentioned, the baby steps that we are taking today as it relates to meetings and engagement. We recently did a similar virtual town hall with our sustainability and climate action plan. So there's some lessons learned, and clearly there's more for us to do to make more effective use of the current platforms. But just as an example, what that showed and what this little demo opens the possibility of is on-demand availability of material that we haven't been able to really effectively use for our community meetings. And certainly, as Millette pointed out, we could even do office hours that would allow more direct interaction that builds on what we've already identified as a challenge with this effort in particular. And it's to engage parts of the community that are beyond the immediately proximate to the tracks. And so the combination of both on-demand as well as virtual availability of material really does present an interesting next sort of resource that we could be using as we move into the next phase of community engagement on this effort as well as others. So again, not to presuppose that this is the way to go, you know, certainly not exclusively the way to go, but did want to make sure that you had the benefit of the tools that we're looking at that could be helpful in the next phase of community engagement. So with that, let me turn it back to Chair Nadia.
Thanks. I see, Phil, you've got your hand up first.
Yeah.
I'll let you go. And if I can ask other XCAP members, if you'd like to ask Ed a question or if you'd like to speak on this, now would be the time to look on your participants list that you should see on the right-hand side, and on the bottom right corner, click raise hand so I can see who else would like to speak. Go ahead, Phil.
So these questions are about the tool that Millette presented. I mean, it looks very intriguing. So my first question is this tool intended to be left up for an extended period of time so people can just engage at their convenience, or is it at a specific time slot like 6 to 8 p.m. on some future Wednesday evening?
All right, Nolette, would you be, okay. good.
Yeah, sure. I can answer that. I mean, I think that our vision would be that it would be up for an extended period of time. I mean, there's no reason that it couldn't be, even as a, similar to where we have things on the website that people go back and revisit as resources. We could do this similar thing with this website. I don't think it would be for a limited time. I think it would be
Okay.
for an extended period of time as you move towards selecting your preferred alternative.
That's great. So this leads to my next question. Can we as XCAP members see the question and answer files?
I don't know that you'll be able to see them. I'm sure there's, with exporting from the feedback, I'm sure we could transmit those. I don't know that you'd be able to click, and we would want everybody to have access to all the feedback, but we definitely could export that and share.
Yeah, well, export is fine as long as we see the text. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
I see Adina's hand next, and then Carrie will be after that. Adina, you need to unmute yourself so we can hear you.
You're unmuted, but still can't hear you.
I just unmuted on the phone. I was preventing you from hearing Eat Lunch, for which you are happily spared. Two very different comments on aspects of the staff presentation. And one is on the process, where I think overall it is a good thing to see our public sector and civic life having this crash course in how to use digital technology to have remote meetings, to allow public comment that may be enabling, like addressing the security issues of Zoom bombing aside, people that have something constructive to share but might have childcare, work responsibilities, and have a harder time participating in decisional meetings, as well as the type of digital format. I think it is a good tool to be added into the toolbox. And with some of my advocacy work, I've been starting conversations with other groups that are working on a range of issues. There was a bill in the state legislature this year that being moved by Assemblymember Mullen, with its original scope being about legalizing the use of social media for certain types of purposes as relates to the Brown Act. And Assemblymember Mullen and the Redwood City City Council member who wrote that law they are interested. That bill is not moving due to the COVID buzzsaw, but they are looking next year to update that to legalize some of the things we are doing now under the governor's executive order to potentially make these things legal in the long term. We'll reach back out separately about whether there's broader interest in making this legal, so we can take advantage of this not only during our pandemic period but future. And speaking of the future, and the future with the 150-year-old technology that is continuing to be an important part of our metropolitan area. While I am hearing some people who have really been opposed to urbanized areas and strongly supportive of private vehicle transportation, now getting airtime to say, well, because of this pandemic, cities are gone. People are all going to be living in very remote exurbs and driving all the time. I think that while we don't know how things are going to be changing from this pandemic, the likelihood that we are going to want a high functioning public transportation system after this is all over and done with I think is pretty good. And the Metropolitan Transportation Commission just this morning, as part of giving out the first round of $1.3 billion in federal funding for relief for the transit agencies that are serving essential trips right now, they just convened a task force to work on the recovery of the transit system as a system. So that is something that the region is starting to work on. And so while I do expect the next couple of years to potentially be bumpy, I'm also glad to hear staff bring forward the concept of potentially having, recovery stimulus funding that could accelerate some of the capital programs like freight separation. So I think continuing to work on this and be shovel ready is a good thing.
Okay. Thanks, Adina. Larry, I see you putting your hand up.
Yes, sorry I can't find a little button that says I want to talk. But anyway, a few things. One, first, I think that staff is on the right track in saying we should see to complete our work and provide it to the council. I would add emphasis to one aspect of what Phil said, that is possibility of a major infrastructure bill coming out of Congress and the present administration in fairly short order. Our infrastructure commission, which was headed by former governor of Pennsylvania, estimates that we'd have more than $1 trillion worth of infrastructure deficiencies that need to be repaired. And supposedly the president's in favor of it. He said many, many times, we want a big infrastructure bill. The Democrats are in favor of it, but somehow they've never gotten together. But I think the pressure of COVID-19 may very well result in a major, major infrastructure bill coming out of Congress and signed by the president this year. And I think so that Phil is on the right track in saying that we want to be shovel ready for that. But I want to say one thing where I think I differ from the staff. I don't think we need, I've been pushing, as you may recall, for us to be done in time for the council to put something on the ballot in November if it looked appropriate to them. Well, I think that's clearly out of the question now, thanks to COVID-19. So I think we have a little bit more time before a infrastructure bill could come out of Congress, signed by the president, and proceed to a reasonable time period of implementation. So I think we ought to be moving to get this done as early as possible. But my concern is with our ability to interact with the public. And because of this and some other activities I'm involved in, this is probably my 9th or 10th Zoom meeting in the last month. And yes, it's very, very nice. And it's great to talk to family and friends if you can't see them any other way. But it's not the same thing as having a public meeting with people being able to talk in the corridors or during breaks or getting a feel for people on a face-to-face basis. That's the way human beings interact. So I'm concerned that we have to come up with as good a compromise as we can, since I don't think we're going to be having public meetings where people are actually present in the council chambers in the next 60 days. So as I've thought through this, I think that what we have to do is to have a super good effort to really reach out to people, because I think that we really want the community to be behind whatever it is that we end up recommending, or at least feel that they've been heard. I think that the last thing we want to have is this matter to go to the council sometime, at whatever time in 2020, and a number of people get up and say, we haven't been consulted, you guys did this in the dark. Yeah, you did it on Zoom, but who had only 20, I mean, in one sense, it's great that 20 odd people are participating today via Zoom who aren't on XCAP, but we've got 65,000 people who live in the community. So 200 out of that is not very good. I would at least like to have the potential that everybody is well informed. So I would say one, a more stretched out timeline, maybe every 3 weeks rather than 2 weeks, but to use that additional time to really inform the public of the various ways that they can get information here so that they will feel that they've been heard. And I think that's really an important part of our charge, not just that we reach a decision, but we reach a decision in a way that we can say to the public, you all were involved, everybody's had a chance, and we've thoroughly heard everybody who wants to speak on any side of the issue.
Thank you, Larry. Actually, Carrie Templeton had her hand up next, but I just got a text message from her that her Zoom crashed and she's trying to restart it and get back on. So I'm going to go to Megan and then I will go back to Carrie, and then Tony, I see your hand up. So I'll go to you next.
Thanks, Nadia. My question is for staff, which is the cost of the virtual format any different than the cost of the in-person format?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Thank you. We have debated that some in that I think we had a ballpark estimate of 7,000 to 10,000, which is about the cost of maybe a little less than one of our renderings. And I suspect may actually be on the order of one of our fully loaded community meetings when you consider staff time, travel time, which is an interesting dimension that's no longer part of the costs to bring folks from all over the Bay Area in order to do one of our in-person town halls. So I think it's still something of a point of discussion, but that was the order of magnitude that we had discussed in order to set this up.
Thank you.
And Ed, I would assume that costs are going to go up. Simply, you've got more cleaning of rooms and more space that's needed. So we might even need a different size venue. I don't know how big we can get to be able to have these kinds of meetings.
Good point.
Okay, I don't see Carrie is back on yet. So we'll go to Tony, and then when Carrie comes back on, I'll get Carrie.
So my issue, and I sort of agree with Larry about having something shovel ready, but in the design and construction industry, you get about 2 out of these 3 issues. One is speed, one is quality, and the other one is cost. And usually you can get 2 out of the 3. And I would say in these Zoom times, in my business, we're about 25% less efficient than face-to-face. And so the timeline will probably extend somewhat because of Zoom, or because of these virtual meetings. And I think we have some complicated issues and need to layer on some more criteria that Megan and you have shared, such as pedestrians and bicyclists and so on. That layer is missing. We know much about the cars, automobiles that need to go through, and that's important, and the train is important, but I think we need to look at pedestrians, bicyclists, and disabled a little bit more in all of these plans. So I think moving the timeline a little bit further back, Larry suggests 3 weeks. I would say let's evaluate it in 3 weeks, but the more time you get, the better, because this is less efficient than the past.
So just as a reminder, we're not going to get the level of detail for bike and pedestrian and ADA stuff until we are able to select the alternative that we want to then study to get to that next level. So it's just as a reminder, like part of the reason we don't have a lot of these details is because just at this level of design, we don't get that. And we're being asked to sort of make that decision ahead of time. Tony, yeah.
That said, I think that it shows that our priorities are mainly fast-moving traffic, cars and trains, and pedestrians and bicyclists are Palo Alto's soul. And I think we need to add that on before we can really tell which alternative is doing the best for that section of the community.
I don't see Carrie back on yet. Is there any other XCAP member who'd like to speak? Greg or Dave or Greg, go ahead.
No, I don't. I mean, it's good to see everybody, and I'm glad we're still talking, but I don't have anything to add on this topic.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else, if you want to speak, make sure you hit the raise hand button on the participants panel. We're up to 39 attendees, so yay. Just shows there's still an interest.
I dare say, Chair, that this may be more attendance than we've ever had in person.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah.
Not ever, but it's high.
It's high, but it also shows, I think, you know, that if and when we have physical meetings again, we're going to have to think about how spaced out 40 people are going to be in a room. So, well, so if we don't have any, I don't see any other hands up. I just wanted to say I agree that there's probably going to be some stimulus something, having been, I mean, I first got involved with rail stuff in 2009, which is when the stimulus dollars really made high-speed rail a thing, because it had passed in the 2008 ballot measure, but it didn't really become an issue until money was given to that project, and that's what made it real. I will say that if stimulus money does come for something like this, the 40 attendees will seem like a very light meeting, because the same way the money comes, so come the people, and so comes the interest. So this will get super exciting. You know, if we're still doing Zoom meetings, this could take a lot longer. But I think I'd like to echo, I am concerned about having a robust community process. I think what's unique is, up until this point, we as XCAP members had been working on trying to write our reports of what we've done up until this point, understanding that we had sort of started our deliberations, we had eliminated the tunnel, and then we were going to have the next part of our conversations when life was sort of interrupted. It's been great that AECOM has continued to do work, and I know we're going to talk about some of the work that AECOM has done for the Churchill partial underpass in the next item. But it does seem like we could at least continue for a while we start to get new information coming in. And frankly, as this continues to develop and we feel how these Zoom meetings are working, we can decide as a group whether we think we're going to be able to get to full deliberations and making a report, or whether we think our report is going to look more like, hey, here's where we got to. Here are all the pros and cons of all of the items, but we didn't feel we could choose because either we didn't have a public process, or we weren't able to really have deliberations over Zoom because it was too awkward, or what have you. So I think in the near term, there's certainly enough information that needs to continue to come in on the new alternatives for us to sort of move forward. But I want to just check in with the group and see how everybody feels about how that looks. I see Philip and then Phil, but I'll give it to you first since I see you visually waving.
Oh, is that me? Okay. I just wanted to note for XCAP to consider that the topic of community engagement is actually not formally part of the assignment to XCAP. That up until pre-COVID, we have been staff been reporting that directly to the council in terms of the town halls, the expanded or extended outreach that we've been doing ourselves. So I think it's certainly something that should be discussed with the council in terms of what their expectations are for what the XCAPs, or how community engagement should factor into the XCAPs recommendation. Early on, the discussion from the council was explicit recognition that you're not elected, therefore you should not bear the burden of expecting to, quote unquote, represent the community in your decision making. So there's a nuance between representation and how you take that into consideration for your own decision. But I do want to make explicit that, I think the way that the assignment was originally framed did not anticipate that the XCAP needed to take community input explicitly as part of your work. So, and again, I'm not suggesting that you can't consider it, but do want to just point that out as we go forward, that this is, I suspect, a discussion that really should involve the council as well.
Thank you. I should clarify, when I was talking about community engagement, I simply mean on the new ideas while XCAP is looking at them. I don't mean sort of the broad general final decision that would be made by council. So I just, the new ideas will continue to be iterative based on feedback that we get, certainly from XCAP, but we've gotten sometimes some really great feedback from the community on, hey, did you think about changing this or changing that? And so that when I talk about community feedback, I'm specifically meaning on that portion of it, not the final thing. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify that. Philip, I see your hand, and then I see Phil Burton. So Philip.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I was just going to say that everybody's getting really excited about the potential for stimulus. I just want to mention that while stimulus potentially is a huge chunk of money and provides a lot, and apologies for the shouting in the background. This is not planned, I promise. I just want to mention that probably in the past 3 or 4 months, we've had 3 different grant opportunities that the city has looked at as potential funding opportunities for grade separation that we had to pass up because of the current status of the project. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phil.
So I'm a little troubled by what I heard a few minutes ago because I thought I was the representative from Midtown South. And that, to me at least, implies that I try to represent the opinions of my neighbors as best as I can collect them. And in some previous meetings, I've expressed some frustration at, you might call, my inability to really get a level of engagement that I would have liked. So I view these upcoming town halls as a wonderful opportunity to really hear a lot. I am concerned that what I don't want to have happen is that we become overly influenced by a well-orchestrated email campaign by a small group. And I'm not taking one side or the other with regard to the substance of those emails, but just pointing out that we are present somewhat, I mean, maybe not vulnerable, but certainly, well, maybe you are vulnerable to that. Whereas having the ability to participate in a town hall, even if it's virtual, would give us a much broader viewpoint. So unless the council explicitly rules it out, I would be in favor of having the community town hall prior to our making our final recommendations to council. And I think it's actually in the council's best interest. They don't want us making recommendations in a vacuum that ignores what might be potential for widespread community opposition that we were blind to. So that's my 2 cents here. Thank you.
Philip, I see your hand again. Or maybe it just didn't clear from before.
Sorry, I didn't just lower it.
Okay, no worries. Okay, anybody else before we go to public comment on this issue? Okay,
I'm
XCAP. Oh, Carrie, you're back. Welcome back. Go ahead, Carrie.
Hi, sorry about that. I had to relocate due to technical difficulties, but I assume this may have already been covered while I was out, so I will be brief. But one, I appreciate that we are moving forward and we are going to be ready in case a windfall does occur. And two, I think it's great that we're having these kind of not only using technology to have our meetings, but really getting creative about it. I really appreciated the presentation from our consultant about how we might do the town halls. That was great. And then just to give a plug once again for what Adina brought up with Kevin Mullen and Giselle Hale's project to help technology be a longer term presence in our public communication. I think that would be great too. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you, Carrie. And I do see Keith has his hand up. So Keith, you can go ahead.
We mentioned stimulus. In the past stimulus, what was the criteria? What was the maturity required to be considered shovel ready? Does someone have experience with that?
Sore subject for me who's worked on high-speed rail, because the high-speed rail will tell you they will shovel ready, and then it turned out they were not so shovel ready. I think it's probably fair to say, and I'll let staff, you can wave if you want to talk on this, but it's varied, and the stimulus isn't always the same. So I think the previous stimulus was the Obama administration had a focus on big, large infrastructure projects, and they had decided what those were, and high-speed rail was a national goal. So California was one of different states that received some pot of that money. Of course, we have no idea how the Trump administration may decide to dole out the money. It may go to rebuilding small businesses and not necessarily transportation projects. I think it's everyone is hoping for something at this point, but I think we won't know until we know. And frankly, it's a matter of sort of just being ready so that if money falls from the sky, we are ready to catch it. Ed, I guess my question is there a level of engineering that we have to be at to be considered at least eligible? Like, what's a milestone that we would need to reach to be able to apply for some of the things that Philip was talking about earlier? That might be helpful to understand.
Well, I think, Nadia, the way you phrase it is right on, that to a certain extent it is purely political. And so it seems more so in this administration than it was during the Obama administration. And as such, again, it's negotiable. And so we won't know until we know. And so I suspect we will just want to be in a position that we can make the argument that we are shovel ready. And that'll be up to the powers that be as to how that review happens. It has been traditional that it would go through the U.S. Department of Transportation and then hand it off to some extent to the states. Whether it'll go exactly this route or not, it's hard to say. And again, it's traditional that there are buckets of funding that might be described, perhaps some for interstate commerce, some related to economic revitalization, and categories along those lines. So we'll have to see how anything takes shape, and it's really the sausage making that will happen both in Congress and with the administration. One point, I just, as long as I've got the floor, to reiterate that I think both Adina and Carrie made with respect to our meetings, just our own little version of it, and I don't want to assume that everyone's aware that by executive order, the governor during this emergency period made changes related to the Brown Act. And so that enabled the meetings that we're having here. So there have been changes to the rules that have been a direct result of COVID-19 that in some ways we may not go back from. And so prior to COVID-19, it was not possible for us to have a meeting like this. There needed to be a physical location where testimony was taken. And so we've already taken steps that, again, may not be appropriate or necessary for us to go back. So just wanted to note that. Thank you.
Chantal, I have a question for you just procedurally. So I'm going to go to a public comment next, but we don't have this agendized as an action item. So I don't know if we need to move the schedule or we're just discussing it and then we'll just move to the next item. In other words, you don't need a formal motion or anything on this item. Is that correct?
Now I'm dealing with the unmute issue. I'll have our fair share. Usually we would list something as action, but I don't think we listed anything as action or discussion on this agenda. So
yeah, it just says work plan and estimated timeline update in light of COVID. And so it doesn't really say whether it would be a discussion or an action. It's just sort of on there.
Oh, wait, but we did list number 5 as action. Yeah, I think that was an oversight.
Okay.
Well, in fact, I think, as staff has talked about it, and in fact, based on the pre-meeting we had with the chair and vice chair, as I use the term baby steps, in keeping with the baby steps, that with every meeting, we're learning more, we're doing things different and hopefully better, that having this simply as a discussion is appropriate at this point in time. And as we schedule your next update to the council, perhaps then we can set that up as an action item for XCAP that then leads to the council discussion.
Yes, and if there are summary things that we pull out of this, because we also have to take that contract amendment and the work plan to council. Mm-hmm. And so if there are sort of high level summary of things that you want us to take into account, we can just note those today.
Okay.
To Ed's point.
All right, great. So I think we can certainly move on to the public comment portion. So Sylvia, you're going to be up next. And from what I can see, it looks like we have 4 attendees who have their hand raised to speak. So if you'd like to speak on this item, again, this is item number 3, work plan and estimated timeline updates in light of COVID. I'll ask you guys to do whatever Sylvia says to be able to speak.
Well, any members of the public wishing to speak on this item, please digitally raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9 if dialing in by phone. I'll give you a little bit of time to find the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. Susan Newman, you are our first speaker. You can unmute yourself now.
How's that? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Hi there. It's nice to see all of you, actually. I kind of missed your faces. I only wanted to say, as a member of the aforementioned public, that I think the idea of the virtual town meetings is exciting, given the givens. I do have a concern that was brought up by Phil in a different context, which is that if we're not there together, we won't be able to hear or get a summary of the comments of our fellow Palo Altans. And as I understood it, when Phil asked whether XCAP would have access to the, the stream of comments from the public, there was something about not wanting to share all of it, or if I understood it correctly. And I think that would be a loss to the community, because I think we're influenced by the perspectives and comments, observations of our fellow residents. Yep. I think I'm done.
Okay, sorry about that. My screen changed. All right, thank you, Susan. The next person to speak is Cathy Jordan, and you may unmute yourself, Cathy.
Yes, so thank you. As for virtual town halls or communication processes, how will the residents get notified that they can participate? How would we ensure that all can participate? One of the speakers mentioned concern about making sure that people could feel they are being heard. Unfortunately, it sounds as though we want to provide an opportunity for them to speak, but not necessarily be heard, it sounds to me. I think a number of our residents would be surprised to understand that this process is continuing, regardless of whether Caltrain has not said they're stopping it. I think especially residents along Embarcadero Road would be surprised to understand that our community would be considering closing Churchill based upon a business plan that is no longer operative at Caltrain, a business plan that was questionable in its assumptions to start with of doubling ridership. Whereas now that business plan has no real contact with reality, as it is 90% short of the previous ridership figures. A plan that called for increase in service based on population increasing along rail line in dense transit-oriented developments, which, given what's happened with COVID-19, are now called into question, just as mass transit has been called into question, and even a former commissioner of the FDA has said that to keep your workers healthy, they should avoid mass transit. We do have a functioning mass transit system already in Caltrain. The question is, what relevance does this business plan have when it is no longer operative with the plans and figures and ridership numbers that prompted this whole process?
Thank you. The next speaker is Eileen Fakin. You can unmute yourself. Eileen?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. So I have 3 comments basically. One, I love the spirit of learning and the Zoom, participation. And I think, one thing is it does allow for people who work, who couldn't necessarily come at a 4 o'clock on a Wednesday to participate. So kudos for learning and doing this via Zoom and for reacting in that way. Point number 2, someone on the XCAP committee made the comment about, the fear of this group being unduly influenced by emails and such things. And that struck a chord because I've actually seen an email from a member of this XCAP committee rallying other people in the community to send emails back to the XCAP community. And that seems to me to be counterproductive and a little bit too, when they're telling the public what to say, I think that's problematic at least. And number 3, I do, as a taxpayer, as much as I think, it's interesting to continue to look at these options, I would honestly be a bit aghast to see us make some real recommendations to close Churchill or do something that is pretty dramatic, given that we have a new normal that nobody knows what it's going to look like. We know it's going to take a long time for everything to settle out over the next year, 2 years, et cetera. So I would proceed with a lot of caution to making very big changes. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Lawrence. You may unmute yourself. Lawrence.
Lawrence, if you
Okay.
can hear us, you need to unmute yourself.
Lawrence.
Oh, hi. I really don't have much to say. I'm just concerned about closing Churchill. That's why I'm in these meetings. I simply don't think it's right to shut out the whole area, the traffic and all that. So thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. The next person is Eduardo Latch or Yatch. You may unmute yourself now.
Thank you very much. I think that the idea of having the Zoom meetings is a great idea. I am working right now and I'm able to time shift and work and listen to what you guys are doing while I'm doing work. So I appreciate that. And I think it's a great idea. Given that a number of people have been commenting on the closing of Churchill, I wanted to jump in and say that I believe that the work that the community has done in looking at the traffic has been phenomenal. And that all of the analysis that have been done about the traffic changes when we address and improve Oregon and Embarcadero have indicated that everything across the whole city is going to improve. I do think that Churchill should be closed for reasons of safety for the children who are going to school. And also, given that the majority, about 60 to 70% of the traffic going through Churchill and causing safety issues to both children and residents are really just doing a bypass between Alma and El Camino. That bypass can be easily addressed by the mitigation measures that will improve everything in the city, as the ACOM and the traffic consultants have shown. So I'm in favor of doing what the consultants have said and improving the situation across the city in a cost-effective way, much cost-effective than providing the Mike Pierce ditch, or God forbid the railway lifted. So I do think that we should look at what the work has been done and listen to that and realize that, yes, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, traffic is going to be back to normal. Caltrain is going to be back to normal. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Winter Dellenbach. And Winter, you can unmute yourself now.
You did pretty well on the name. Here's the thing. The last time, as far as I remember, when we left, the last town hall I went to, I've been to most of the town halls on this, was community engagement overall was a big concern. I mean, in the overall community, not the people that were kept going to the town halls, town hall after town hall, but the, what is it, the 9/10 of the community that hasn't shown up at any town halls, or whatever high percentage it is. So now, then the virus hit, and now we're stuck with Zoom. Zoom is a good substitute to put up with to get us through this, and it's good. I appreciate Ed's comments and concerns about Be Shovel Ready. I understand what you're talking about, Ed. I do. I appreciate that. However, we have a big community engagement problem. And it's good that more people are listening to this meeting because they're home and they don't have a lot to do, or we have less to do, and we're tuning in, and this is really good. However, it's not going to take care of the underlying major problem of non-community engagement. And I don't see how with this timeline, if it marches forward, that we're going to need the massive community fill the massive community engagement gap that we have via Zoom. And I'm really concerned about this timeline succeeding as it's laid out. And there has to be huge community buy-in to this if this is going to succeed, whatever this is. And I'm not advocating this, I'm advocating that there has to be massive community buy-in, and I'm not sure it's going to be done this quickly under these circumstances with this virus being a Zoom.
Thank you. The next speaker is Sean He. You may unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Sean. And so I just wanted to say the Zoom meetings I think are great. I mean, I wouldn't be able to attend this meeting without without these Zoom meetings. But what I want to just share here today is I just want to express my support of closing Churchill for basically the same reasons that Eduardo had mentioned. I think we're on the same page here. I know we all want to address the traffic concerns, and most importantly, just keeping our, the students that go to Palo High and any other students that cross that intersection safe, right? I've seen a lot of students go across in the morning, before the major traffic hits, and in the evenings, which includes after school hours. So again, I just wanted to just express my support of closing Churchill.
Okay.
Thank you.
That concludes our public speakers.
Great, thank you, Sylvia. Okay, I'm doing a time check. It is 5:15, and I know we all are waiting to sort of hear the Churchill section next. What I'm going to do though is if we could take item 5 before item 4, which should be hopefully fast, which we can take action on, which is the amendment to the XCAP report. There is an attachment associated with that. So basically, what this is at a previous XCAP meeting, we had agreed to a rough outline of what our report would be, and we broke up into groups, and we have been working on the different sections, or each group has been working on different sections. And Megan, Adina, and Carrie are part of the group that's working on section 3.3, which we had labeled under criteria. We had labeled it additional criteria and XCAP debated, which XCAP debated during the process. And in talking to Megan offline, Megan, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just trying to sort of summarize so we can get through this quickly. But in talking to Megan offline, if you recall, as a group, we had a conversation about not going back to the council to update the criteria because that would take too long when we were pushing for the April 30th deadline. And then we also talked about not trying to, as an XCAP, going through the process of weighting the criteria that we were given, because then we might get ourselves into the who weights visual more than, whatever traffic. And so instead, part of what we tried to do was sort of come up with a section where we could capture all of the pros and cons, if you will, that or things that we've noticed, potential things that might need to be mitigated if any one of the alternatives were selected, and using the council's existing criteria as sort of a launching point. And so if you'd envision, I'm a visual thinker, if you think of it like a matrix, it's basically the criteria would be on one side, all the different alternatives along the top. And then as you kind of think about each of these, what are the things that we notice which aren't really captured in the way the council wrote their criteria, but are things that XCAP noticed. So an example might be if you have a viaduct, the XCAPers have and the community have had concerns about how do you use the space under a viaduct. So that would be an example of something that could get captured. And what Megan was proposing in the agenda item number 5 that you have an attachment for was her best effort at trying to capture at least some things that we've learned about things. I think the next step that the group is going to do is kind of trying to do these according to each different alternative and kind of list them alternative by alternative. And the idea would be that if for whatever reason our process ends up stopping and we get sort of frozen in time, that we have a document that at least it tries to capture all of the information that we've worked on up until this point. So Megan, I'll let you unmute yourself, and if you have anything to add about that, because this was really your item that you wanted to put on the agenda, you can talk through it.
Sure, I think you described it very well, Nadia. When thinking about what fit into the council's criteria versus the other additional criteria, it really seemed to me like it was more that we wanted to share what our findings were, the learnings that we'd gained by asking staff questions, asking the consultants questions, learning things, what the concerns of the community were. And some of those directly relate to criteria, and perhaps they can go inside of the section that talks about how the council's approved criteria applies to each alternative. But then there are others that do not fit, for example, the land use under a viaduct, as Nadia mentioned. And so this is my proposal, sort of a draft bulleted list of how those, of our different findings. And then on the very last page, I sort of created an example snippet of the proposed section that the criteria group, Nadia, myself, Carrie, and Adina would write. So we wanted your feedback on that and approval to change the name of this section from additional XCAP criteria that we debated to something more like XCAP findings or things we learned.
Thanks, Carrie. And just to reiterate to the group, remember, once this group writes this section, this will still be passed out to the rest of XCAP, so you guys can all opine and make sure that we got everything and that we didn't miss anything. Because this is, in some ways, this turns out to be the meatier section because it's really capturing the nitty gritty of our process. And I'm going to put Megan on the spot slightly to say that Megan, we're going to be losing Megan soon. She's actually going to be moving to the East Coast. I know, boo. So we're really motivated to try to at least get as much of the stuff that Megan has in her brain about this process before she leaves us. And I think, Megan, when is your last day going to be?
Sure. So I'll be stepping back from the XCAP at the end of May. That's because I'll be moving to Washington, D.C. at the end of June. And I wanted to say that I really loved this this process. I mean, maybe not the process specifically, but I've loved working with you all. And it's this whole, my involvement in this that has really gotten me interested in being more involved in government. So I'll be an IEEE fellow with Congress next year. And so that's where I'm going. And I would love to chat with each of you individually and make sure that there's continuity of anything that's in my head out to the rest of the XCAP. And I just want to say again that I've really enjoyed working with each and every one of you.
Thank you, Megan. So XCappers, do we, I have a hand up. Do we have anyone from the XCAP who'd like to speak on this issue? Are you guys okay with maybe XCAP observations is probably the most neutral term. And so if there's people who oppose it or have other thoughts, now would be the time. If you could hit your raise hand function, that would be good. Otherwise, what I'll do is, unless there's any other discussion that needs to be had, I will go to I have one member of the public who wants to speak on this, and then I'll bring it back so we could just do a motion and then get to our next Churchill item. So any XCAP members who want to speak? Okay. All right. So Sylvia, if you want to take it to, I don't see anybody, so we could take it to public comment. It looks like we have one person who wants to speak on this issue.
Yes. Carrie Yarkin, you may unmute yourself. Carrie Yark, oh, there you go. Carrie, you can start speaking.
Highlighted changes to the letter I sent all of you XCAP members. And I think an important point was from the summary of City Council adopted criteria. They did not talk about traffic flow and the problems that we have with traffic flow. I did a whole section on bicycling and unsafe bicycling to Palo, but the point I wanted to just make sure you're all aware of is that the Embarcadero and Oregon are the two main arterial connecting to El Camino, and there are two turns that you cannot do from Alma to Embarcadero and Embarcadero to Alma, and I highlighted that in red. Alma southbound to Embarcadero West you cannot do, and Embarcadero West to Alma South you cannot do because they're not connected. So the arterial roadways were designed to connect. And now that we're talking about grade separation and closing Churchill, that this would be a great time to redesign or correct the poorly designed arterials and improve the connectivity so the traffic will flow. And the mitigations from Hexagon solve the connectivity issue, and there's almost no increase in local traffic. So since that is one of the criteria from the city, which they did not rank, I think that now if you do the grade separation, you close Churchill, you improve Page Mill, Oregon, and you improve Alma and Embarcadero, all of it would go through. And I think that the Hexagon traffic analysis would hold true. So I think looking at it system-wide, I know Eduardo made the point too, you should look at the system-wide, not just one street. I mean, this is Churchill and Embarcadero, but Embarcadero was originally set up to carry the large flow of traffic, and it's been, it has not served its purpose. And so I think that the improvements will go a long way to go through with the grade separation and the choice of the option of what you're going to do with Churchill. So I just want to get that out there since I couldn't get in before on the phone.
Thank you. There are no other raised hands.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So bringing it back to XCAP, I'd like to make a motion then that we change the proposed table of contents for the XCAP final report, have section 3.3 named XCAP observations. Change it from the existing, which was additional criteria XCAP debated during process, question mark. That's literally what it said. So do I have a second? If you want to visually raise your hand for me so I can call it out. Tony is my second, great. Well, I'm not going to speak to my motion. I think it's pretty self-evident. Tony, did you want to speak at all to your second?
No, I think it's a really good summary of where we are. There's a little bit more additional stuff that can be nuanced in here, but I think it's a very good job. Congratulations, Megan, Nadia, and
Adina and Carrie. Yeah.
Carrie.
Thank you. And this is just, we're just renaming a section. This section will continue to grow, so we will all get a chance to add to it. Okay, so the one thing we did not practice was how do we take a vote on items. So I'm just going to
it has to be a roll call vote. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Nope, perfect. Okay, great. So when I call your name, if you could tell me how you vote, that would be great. So Gregory Braille.
Yes.
Okay, Phil Burton.
Yes.
Tony Carrasco.
Yes.
In Young Cho.
Yes.
Megan Kahn.
Yes.
Larry Klein. Larry's trying to unmute himself.
Yes.
Okay, great. I think Pat Lau is not on the call. Adina Levin. Adina, we can't hear you. I need an audio?
Yeah.
Perfect. Then Keith Reckdahl.
Yes.
Great. Dave Shen.
Yes.
Carrie Templeton.
Yes.
Great. And myself is a yes. So that is unanimous vote. Nice job. Phew. Okay. Moving on to our next agenda item. So now we have drum roll, please. Discussion for item number 4, the presentation from AECom for the layout and typical sections for the Churchill partial underpass. So we will have, I'll turn it over now to the AECom team.
Great, thanks Nadia. This is, my name is Peter DiStefano. I'm a civil engineer with AECom. Last time we spoke in a public forum about Churchill, about the new idea here at Churchill, was at the town hall in February. So at that time, we were preparing for a second follow-up town hall to talk more detail about that alternative. So I'm going to go into that a little more detail here. I'm going to share my screen here to show the exhibits. And Chantal, does everyone have a copy of these? Is that correct?
So there was,
right?
Yes, there uploaded online was the exhibit information, and I think Peter had a small change to the first 2 pages. So Peter is going to walk you through, I believe, the 2 newer pages, and then we will upload those online after the meeting.
Great, thanks, Chantal. Yeah, so this first one, we made a slight adjustment. We added the ped bike underpass at Kellogg, and updated the legend accordingly. Let me just step you through this legend here real quick. Let me zoom in here.
Actually, I'm sorry. Are you screen sharing yet?
I am. Oh shoot! Sorry, I forgot to click on share. I just clicked on the.
You were so into it, and we were with you, but I felt like you forgot a button.
I did. I did forget a button. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yes, we can see
thank you.
The legend.
Yeah, that's just the legend. Yeah. So let me just talk about the colors here real quick so everyone understands what these colors mean. The purple really represents just the modifications to the roadway. So it's either like a lowered roadway, or in the case on Alma Street for northbound Alma, that's just a widening at grade. So it's a kind of combination. Think of it as new pavement, if you will. The pinkish reddish color are the pedestrian and bike ramps that descend into the tunnel. And then the brown color is the structure. And there's really just two main structures here to zoom back out here. We have the structure that for the railroad tracks across Churchill, and the structure for the ped bike tunnel underneath the tracks and underneath Alma. Sorry, one second, let me get my zoom. I somehow lost my zoom window. I guess I don't need that, but okay. Okay. Before I dive into some of the details here, let me just talk about the traffic movements, just so everyone's on the same page with what we're doing here. So let's say you're coming from the Southgate neighborhood or from El Camino, traveling east on Churchill. You're going to have a decision point right here near the Pali-Castellea intersection. You would stay right if you want to stay at grade and access Mariposa, and you'd veer left. Maybe I could zoom in here a little bit. You'd stay right for Mariposa and you'd veer left to descend into a tunnel, or into the underpass, I should say. There's 1 second. My buttons are hidden behind this other window. Okay, so then now when you reach the intersection here at Churchill, with Alma and Churchill, you go underneath the railroad tracks. You're forced to either make a right or left. You can't continue straight on Churchill. And if you're making a left onto northbound Alma, if you want to access Old Palo Alto, let me zoom back out, you wouldn't be able to make the right turn onto Kellogg. The first right you could make would be at Melville. And conversely, if you're traveling on southbound Alma, if you make the right here at the intersection, the first left into the neighborhood is at Lowell. At Coleridge, you would not allow to be able to make that left. Now, for people traveling out of the Old Palo Alto neighborhood, you'd be forced to make a right turn at Kellogg, Churchill, and Coleridge. The other intersections would act as they are today. Taking the traffic movement from northbound Alma, let me zoom in here. You'd have a decision point here. You would veer left if you want to descend into the underpass to access Southgate or El Camino, and you would stay right to stay on northbound Alma at grade. And we have some renderings that show this, a little bit more clearly than I could explain. And then in the southbound Alma direction, it's pretty straightforward. You would just stay on the 2 lanes. You'd go into this S curve here, and then you would descend into the underpass. Now, if you just want to continue on southbound Alma, you would just do so, continue straight through that intersection. And if you want to access Southgate or the high school, you'd make that right turn at that intersection. Up here at the top is the profile for Alma. This is exaggerated 5 times, so it looks a lot worse than it really is. It's more of an engineering drawing. This is the first exhibit of the package, and then the second one is this one here. And I just made a slight update to this one. We updated one of the dimensions here that wasn't correct before, and the purple shapes for the pavement match what we show in the plan view on this previous one. I'm not going to step through all these, but you can see through the package here that we have different renderings of various viewpoints. On this exhibit in particular, it's really the same location, but one is taken at ground level, the other as a bird's eye view. We also have some before-after photo sims that we've done for this alternative, give everybody a sense of, what's, like for example, these are really good for Alma to see, like which trees are going to be removed and how we're widening Alma on the northbound direction side. Did anyone have any questions before I continue?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few questions, and I think a few people do as well.
Okay. Sorry, so what I see Megan's hand first. I see Megan and then Greg and then Carrie. So Megan, you want to start?
I'm curious if I might ask Peter whether you want to go through the full animation first before you open it up for questions, because I think it might answer some questions.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Let me.
I think that's probably helpful, yeah. Ex-cappers, if you can hold, I'll let Peter finish.
Yeah, I'm going to stop that share and let me reshare again for the animation. Sorry, I'm a little technical difficulty here. Here we go. Okay, actually, before I start the animation, I want to tell everyone that we show this animation. It's basically how this is going to get built, how it could get built, one conceivable way it could get built. We show a traditional shoe fly, and the reason we did that was that we've been in contact with Caltrain recently about the jack box that's done on the LIR. We discussed internally about top-down construction, which is done on some freight lines throughout the country. Caltrain has not given us a definitive answer on that, not surprisingly. So what we're going to show here is something that's, you know, tried and true. We know Caltrain has done this in the past, so that's the traditional shoe fly that we've seen before in the other alternatives. So I'll start the animation here. Same orientation as the exhibit, tracks running left and right across the screen. The first stage would be to get the utilities really out of the way of the excavation area. So that's pretty straightforward. And I'm gonna actually pause it here real quick. One of the, after utilities get relocated, really one of the first things we probably wanna do is build the ped bike tunnel first. And that has advantages for two reasons. One, it could conceivably be a standalone project. And two, if that gets built first, it's a way for peds and bikes to cross Alma and the tracks while the main heavy construction is done at Churchill. So that's kind of what we show here, is that getting done first. Doesn't have to be that way, but again, this is just one way that it could be done.
Peter, I'm not seeing anything on your screen here.
Processing fast enough.
I did put it on pause. Can you see the animation or not at all?
Nothing. It's
oh, it says my screen sharing is paused. I didn't do anything. Let me stop the share and restart it. Sorry about that. I don't know why that happened.
While you're doing the technical piece of that as well, I wanted to let the XCAP know that AECOM has prepared the animation as of maybe the last day or so. And so this is something else that is not yet on the website, but we will upload after the meeting.
Let me step back a little bit then.
Yeah, why don't you restart it?
You guys maybe missed the beginning, yeah.
Peter, remember too, you needed to click like the custom video sound box too before the share.
I think I did that, but let me double check. Yeah, optimize screen sharing for video.
There you go.
Okay. Let's shut that down. Okay, can everyone see it animating now? I'm not going to hit pause.
No, just let it go.
I'm just going to let this run.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. So that was that first stage with the utility. Second, the next stage could conceivably be the ped bike tunnel and ramps, of course. The animation shows that in a little more detail later, but second stage could conceivably be widening of Alma. Third stage, the shoe fly tracks. Fourth stage, once the shoe fly tracks are in place, we build the new bridge along the existing alignments. And then once that new bridge is built, then we can do the main excavation for the roads. So this is zoomed in here at Kellogg. Relocate the utilities, get those out of the way so we can build the tunnel. Move the landscaping as needed. And these precast box segments can be done in segments, in sub-stages, if you will. So here we're showing like you could keep the northbound track in operation, say over one weekend, place that box. Or the following weekend, you do another segment, and then you could do that along the complete alignment. If you don't want to close Alma Street completely, we could find ways to keep lanes open during construction. So that's what that's trying to show there. And once the tunnel's in place and backfill is placed over it, then we could start building the ramps, ped bike ramps that descend into the tunnel. And the, yeah, I'll get back to that later. But yeah, so the next stage here would be the widening of Alma Street for the northbound direction. And once that's done, we could get shoe fly tracks in place. With shoe fly tracks in place, we've got room for about 3 lanes of traffic. So we'd have to work with the city and with Hexagon on about whether that's 2 northbound, 1 southbound, or vice versa. We haven't gone to that level of detail of analysis yet. So once we have the tracks on the train area on the shoe fly tracks, then we could clear the excavation area for the new bridge. That's shown here. We'd have to do a dewatering of a cutoff wall. We're going below groundwater here. So once the bridge is in place, then we could put the rail track back on, remove the shoe fly tracks, and put the rail traffic back on the existing alignments. Now for this next stage, for the main excavation, we're only going to have room for 1 northbound lane on Alma. This is where we're just doing the heavy excavation here for Alma. And once that's excavated, then we have this, you can see the final configuration. I think that's about it. So I could open up to questions there.
I have a question.
Nadia, you're muted.
Sorry, it's Tony, if you could put your hand up in the queue. Otherwise, I've got Megan, Greg Braille, and Dave Shen for right now.
Wait.
Okay, and then I see Phil. So go ahead, Megan.
Thank you so much, AECOM, for your work and for the animation. I had one question about the northbound lanes kind of merging, the ones that are coming up out of the underpass and the 2 that are at grade that then merge into 1. Sort of what's the, how is that, what does that intersection look like, I guess?
Let's see if I can share my screen again here. So you're talking about at the intersection with Churchill? Are you talking about here? Or are you talking about further north?
Further north.
Further north.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I got. I'm gonna have to zoom in here.
That kind of shows
blurry. Yeah. Yeah. So this is the lane coming from Churchill, from the Southgate neighborhood. This could also be a lane for just through traffic on northbound Alma as well. But I mean, there'd be really no reason to do that. You would just stay at grade to travel to make that through movement. So that that lane goes into an S curve to get back onto the existing alignment, and then these 2 lanes on Alma at grade would merge into 1. So you get the 3 merging into 2. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, I would like Gary's take on that and if that's going to work acceptably with the, it looks like a pretty sharp S curve right there.
Yeah, it does look sharp from this perspective. It's acceptable for the 30, 35 mile an hour designs you were talking about. In terms of which lane gets merged, I prefer as an engineer seeing that merge coming from the right. But this would have to go through an analysis with Hexagon to see if any adjustments would have to be made. We did share this with Gary from Hexagon. He didn't have any comments on it, so I think from his viewpoint, it was fine.
Thank you. My second question was just to clarify for myself and the public, during the excavation of the portions of Alma that get depressed, all of Alma is closed except 1 northbound lane.
Uh-huh.
And do we
That's
know,
right.
do you have an estimate of how long that might be?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't have estimates yet on each of those phases that I showed in the animation. That's probably our next step, is to get you guys some answers on that. We could conceivably, you know, that large excavation area in that final phase that I showed, we could conceivably do that in sub-stages to minimize the traffic interruptions, but we haven't really looked at that in too much detail yet. I will say that's not going to be a short terrain. I mean, that's a lot of excavation, a lot of pavement to be placed, retaining walls to be constructed. So it's a lot of work. We're talking about, you know, probably bare minimum 6 months, bare minimum.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, Greg Brown, followed by Dave Shen.
Yeah, I have a bunch, but thank you for putting this together. I was reserving judgment on this option until I saw the actual traffic engineer drawing, so I really appreciate that. I noticed on the way down Churchill from the Stanford side, I'm no good at north, south, east, and west. The diagram shows an 11% grade, which is a lot. Clearly, it's not going to be a problem for bikes because they're going to go the other way. We hope at least most of them will. But I know that trucks and buses were a big issue for Palo Alto School District. Have we proven that, like, you know, whatever they have to drive in and out of there can actually negotiate that grade and that intersection in both directions?
Yeah, 11%. Although maybe at first glance it seems steep, and again, at this 5 times vertical exaggeration, it looks probably worse than it is.
Well, yeah, no, what you're showing there is like 45 degrees, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's much flatter than that, of course. 2 things on that. One is that the actual 11% is for a very short length. You know, these vertical curves transition the grade from one to another. So I think it's less than 20 feet. So we're talking about a short distance. And to a lot of other cities, you know, that's going up 11%, 12, even more. I mean, city streets, for example, or could be steeper. So this is an issue for trucks or buses at all. I mean, there's no issue there. Yeah, for bikes, yeah, that'll be a challenge. But I think we're talking about the hardcore road bikers will be using this road.
Yeah, no, that's who's going to
bike tunnel.
Exactly, and that'll be my next question. So how about pedestrians? Thank you for that one. So again, we're going to build a ped bike tunnel as part of that, and I think it's important that anytime we talk about this particular option, we remind everybody that this includes a ped bike tunnel, because people don't. It's not always clear. For the peds who just choose not to use the ped bike tunnel, is there a pedestrian path across Churchill? Across Alma at Churchill? Okay.
No,
okay. So I mean, I think
we'd have to work that. Go ahead.
No, I think no pedestrian path is better than a dangerous pedestrian path. So I'm just trying to make sure that we either have a safe one or none.
I believe we talked about last time that you can make it so that pedestrians can't go on a street, but you cannot prohibit bicycles from going on the street. I mean, they can be dissuaded by signage that shows them there's a bike ped tunnel, but I think it's pedestrians you can block, but you can't block bikes. Ed or Philip, do you want to chime in on that?
Bicycles are vehicles. So you're right.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Sorry, I got 2 more questions. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, you're good.
Is it possible to separate sort of the work plan for the ped bike underpass from the car underpass? Because, for instance, we talked about shovel-ready projects. Well, you want a shovel-ready project that'll improve safety in the Palo Alto High School area. That ped bike tunnel is one right there. Is it possible, because I have a feeling as we go forward as an XCAP, given, you know, the comments about the economic situation and the desire for mythical funding from the federal government, the more we can have this, you know, in digestible chunks, it might be easier to get some of these things to actually happen. So I wonder if there's a way to engineer this so that the whole project is not one big project, but 2 smaller projects.
Yeah, and that's a good question. That's one of the advantages of having this crossing at Kellogg, is that it could conceivably be done separately and independently of the underpass at Churchill. I could maybe let Ed or Phil chime in a little further on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say the danger in that, though, is that if it's not a grade separation project, it might not be eligible for grade separation funding.
Okay.
In relation to this, Measure B money specifically.
But Philip, correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's the Measure B grade set money, but there is also a pocket of funding, the same pocket of funding that we are using to fund this process is also one of the pockets of funding that would be eligible to fund a bike improvement, because it has to do with the fact that our roads are already paved to a certain percent. And so we're getting money from that. I don't know how much will be left in that given what we're spending and what's happening. But I thought that stream of funding, and I believe there's an additional bucket of bike funding that's available to cities in Measure B. That might potentially be another bucket we could look at.
I guess my response is basically that it would be a different pot of funding if you separate them into different types of projects. Some of the bicycle fundings are significantly smaller and probably will have discretionary, non-discretionary kind of purpose. So they might be actually ranked project types and all that.
Okay. So I'm going to be a pain and ask 2 more questions. Are there any drainage issues here? We have a steep grade, we have high retaining walls. It seems like there's a wonderful place for water to collect at the bottom of this whole thing.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, drainage is going to be a problem that we're going to have to solve here. We're going to have a pumping plant to pump the drainage at the low point of the intersection here. That's been included in our cost estimates that we're currently developing. So drainage, although on a conceptual level we've looked at, that's going to have to be looked at more carefully during the next phase.
That also applies to sewer drainage, sanitary sewer drainage, in addition to stormwater. So note that to the extent that there's a sanitary line crossing Alma, that would also need to be relocated, and potentially with, we don't know that a lift station is required, but some pumping may be necessary.
And finally, the precast box construction for the ped bike underpass looks kind of miraculous. It'd be wonderful if we could use that in other places too.
And we are actually working on a project for in Menlo Park where we do a similar type of construction. In fact, Caltrain has done that method of construction commonly on other projects.
Peter, we lost your audio a little bit there when you answered that question.
Yeah, my headphone just died, so let me switch my headphones real quick. All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so that method of construction is commonly done on the Caltrain corridor. It was used for the San Antonio underpass at the San Antonio station. I think it was used on some others. I think at Homer as well, where they kind of build it in segments to maintain rail and, well, in the case for Homer, it'd be just rail traffic, but we're going to be having to deal with road traffic as well when we're building it under Alma.
Oh, so to that point, actually, Peter's response reminds me, we haven't spoken at all about right-of-way here and the need for additional right-of-way from Caltrain in order to do this project. Peter or Philip, could you speak to that?
Sure. Let me unmute so I don't have to hold my spacebar. Sorry. So we got a response from Caltrain about the request for right-of-way here, and the response was actually more specific than we expected to get, because Caltrain in February adopted their rail corridor use policy, which is the RCUP, and that guides the agency decision making about the use of the JP property in support of their long-range vision. And so their response, and this was specifically a question asked about the right-of-way at Churchill, was that it's anticipated that significant portions of JPB's property holdings will be needed to deliver future infrastructure and support future train operations to achieve the long-term service vision. And the RCUP protects those areas that are needed for current and future railroad use by limiting the types and durations of non-railroad uses that can be located in those areas. And then further, this is also an area of the corridor that could be needed for a potential 4-track segment to support increased train service under the business plan's high growth scenario, which the JPB declared not to be precluded in its adopted long-term service vision. Because of these potential future railroad uses in the areas near Churchill, non-railroad uses are limited in this area of the corridor in the RCUP. So the final, I guess, text in this is the city's proposal would most likely be found to be an incompatible use of JPB property.
That was the most direct statement we've gotten out of Caltrain on anything yet.
Yeah, but it also doesn't make any sense because they themselves have said that the Churchill area is not on the map for 4 tracks. So I don't understand if they think we're talking about the same piece of land, or did they misunderstand where we're talking about?
Sorry, they actually did say something about that too. Sorry, let me pull that up.
Philip, assuming we can find this on, we can find this online, or maybe Chantal can distribute a copy of what we got.
Yeah, so what they said is, for the purposes of the RCUP, which governs Caltrain's use of its own property, we took the most conservative approach and considered the potential for a 4-track segment between San Francisco Creek Bridge and Palo Alto to just through the Mountain View Station.
Well, all I'll say is that that has implications for all sorts of things, not the least of which is this alternative generally. I mean, then that would apply to all of Alto. If you're looking at 4 tracks, that's a 4-track viaduct, that's a 4-track everything. Ed, I don't know if you've had a chance to digest this at all, but it doesn't seem to jive with anything we've been working on.
Well, I think what they're telling us is they're taking a very conservative approach in reviewing what we have asked them about, and that ultimately, as Philip says, it's not too surprising, but it does reflect a level of conservatism that is probably in the more extreme side than of what we expected.
Greg, did you have any other questions?
No, well, I mean, I didn't see anything on the diagram that indicated impact on Palo Alto residents' properties. Did I miss something? I mean, other than the big wall next to the house on the corner there.
Yeah, there'll be some right-of-way impacts. There will be no full acquisitions though. There'll be for sure. There's some temporary construction easement impacts, and there'll probably be some minor acquisitions at the intersection corners that you can see. I'm not sure on my screen anymore, but they're showing at the we're widening Alma at those intersections with Kellogg, Churchill, and Coleridge. Those will be minor though.
Well, just to clarify that, I believe, Peter, you may have a rendering on this that shows that in the area that's currently park strip between the curb and the sidewalk would be removed, correct? And that the good news of that, well, the bad news is there are trees in that section that would need to be removed in order to get that additional roadway width. The good news is the area is also currently occupied by overhead power lines. So the assumption would be, because the poles are also too wide to fit in the remaining sidewalk, that an undergrounding would need to be part of the street widening, so that the overhead power lines would go away as well.
That's right. Yeah, good point, Ed. In pages 7 and 8 of the handout that Chantal uploaded, you can see a before and after photo. Well, before being the current photo of northbound Alma, and then on page 8 is the after condition, or the proposed design condition. And if you toggle back and forth between the two, you kind of get a sense of what's going to have to get removed. You can see the planter strip there, and the tree here on the right. Let's see if I can change that tree here on the right. In the final condition, that tree will be gone, and the sidewalk essentially remains where it is today. So that grassy area will be new pavement.
Okay, I've filibustered long enough. It's someone else's turn. Thanks.
Okay, Dave, it's your turn.
Hey, first, hey, thanks, AECOM. Sounded like you guys really did pull quite an effort to get this thing done by this meeting. Really appreciate that. Also, and thanks to Greg, he asked 2 questions, which were, I too was concerned about the 11% grade. It seemed kind of steep, and certainly it was, the picture did look steeper probably. So I hope that's not an issue. And I was also curious about what the takes were, whether they're partial or not, along the east side of Alma, as well as anything on Churchill as well. So my remaining questions then is that bike ped design at Kellogg, is that the one that was the one that was at Churchill but drops down in the middle and goes underneath Alma?
That's exactly right. It's very similar to the option 2 that we presented last year at Churchill. At least on the east side of the tracks, it's very similar. It goes underneath the tracks, underneath Alma, and then it ascends up through the center of the street.
But then at the end of the other side, they'd have to make a right or left turn.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct.
Is it 11
feet
that there's wide? If I remember, that was what the one at Churchill was?
I believe we laid this one out as 10 feet wide. So if you go to pages at the very back of that set, PDFs, 19, 20, and 21, it'll show you a little bit more 3D renderings of that ped bike tunnel.
I just want to say that, oh, go ahead.
And it's shown 10 feet. No, I was going to say it's shown 10 feet wide in these renderings.
Doesn't sound very wide at all. I mean, California Ave, I think, is 8 feet, and we'd be expecting hundreds of bikers to go down there in the morning. I wouldn't want to be a person walking in that width of a ramp when there's that many bikes going down.
Yeah, let me add one more thought to that. Is let me share my screen again here real quick. Underneath the tracks in Alma, we have the ability to go a little wider. So this pink width is about 10. Going much wider would have impact to the existing path and maybe even to the school. But underneath the tracks underneath Alma, we have the ability to go a little bit wider. So that's shown as 20 feet wide. And then it tapers down to 10 feet as we, daylight, if you will, at Kellogg, right there.
Okay, thank you for that. Then I was kind of curious about, given what Philip had said about the right-of-way potential issues, have you thought about if we could not take any property, could this thing even be constructed? How many lanes would it need to drop down to? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion on that. We talked to Hexagon about, hey, could we make this just 1 lane? And I think that initially, I think Gary said that had some potential, but when he looked at it more closely, he said, no, we need 2 lanes on northbound Alma. So that really requires the taking of the planter strip, and that results in some minor impacts to the properties on the corners of those streets that I mentioned, Kellogg, Churchill, and Coleridge. So those 6 corners, if you will.
But so that's the other side. But I think Philip's discussion was more on the train side, right? Or
yeah, so
I heard that.
So on the train side, right, on the west side, at the very least, we're going to have a TCE for this parcel at Mariposa. And we'll probably have a sliver take. We don't, and the reason I'm not giving you guys a definitive answer on this is that we don't even have survey property lines here. So it's hard for us at a conceptual level to say for sure, okay, we're going to have 3,000 square feet of acquisition, for example. we can't say that right now.
Yeah, I'm sure having cranked this out probably overnight last night, there wasn't much time to think about that. And then my last question was, given now you have a little bit more clarity on what this thing is starting to form into, any thoughts on cost implications at all? Because what someone brought up about the pumping potential down there kind of concerns me, as well as everything else. A shoe fly that you're proposing there, which may or may not have to be there, but only that has its cost implications as well. Any thoughts?
Yeah, we started looking at the cost estimate. We still are doing some back checking of our numbers, but we're in the range of 100 to 150 million. And that includes everything. That includes engineering. That includes right-of-way acquisitions, support costs for to do the engineering, I should say, and then it also includes escalation to 2025, which is pretty substantial. I think that was on order of 15, 20 million just for escalation alone.
So, and just to add, that format's similar to what you saw on the fact sheets for all the other alternatives is what we're rolling that up to.
Right.
Great, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Great. So I see virtual hands up. I see Adina, Carrie, and Inyang. I also had noted Tony and Phil both had put their hands up. Also, time check. It's 6:10. This meeting was actually supposed to be only 2 hours, but I can see that in our usual XCAP style, we're going long. But I'll just try to ask folks. I know AECOM will be back, but you know, if you can kind of have your questions ready to go and we can fire them a little bit quickly, that would be helpful. So I'll take Adina and Carrie, and then I'll switch to Tony and Phil, and then Inyang will come back to you because that's just the order I saw them before, if that's okay with you. So go ahead, Adina.
All right. So I'll try and keep this quick. Other people asked the property impacts question, so I am glad to hear that there aren't, you know, full impact on people's homes. I have a question and a comment on the cost and the bike ped aspect. So did that cost include the road and the bike ped?
It did, yes.
Okay. And then in terms of the design, where if you are trying to, you know, build a grade separation project and the safest and most effective way of providing bike ped access along with that road project is not contiguous with the project, Santa Clara County's rules may actually allow Measure B funding for the big roadway project to also include the bike ped component. This is something that my understanding is Santa Clara County's rules may allow. This is something that San Mateo County's rules didn't allow before, and the Measure W rules were changed to allow it because it was a problem. There's other, this situation comes up with other projects. This is highway overpasses where you need to do the bike ped separately. And so before assuming that because it's physically separate that it can't be considered as part of one project, a complete street requirement may well allow that to go onto one budget. So please do check on that.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Adina. Okay, so I'm going to take Carrie, and then I'll do Tony and Phil, and then back to Inyang. Carrie?
All right, thank you. Yes, like some of those who've gone before me, my questions have been most of my questions have been asked. What remains is I just want to emphasize that I am also concerned about the buses using that path and making sure that it's really convenient. Having been stuck on a bus in San Francisco that couldn't quite handle a hill, just want to throw that out there. The big question I have was on the choices about the 2 lanes that go straight through northbound and the one that goes down. You know, driving that today, I know that that turn lane can stack, and I think it's great that we've got that. I like that we still have the ability to have 2 going forward. But what concerns me is that those 2 will be merging together to 1 lane where right before that S curve. Are you following me, Peter? Okay, so help me understand why we need to merge those 2 together, because I think that keeping that traffic flowing would be super helpful. That's just a path I drive a lot, and I see that there is some volume there.
Sure. So you talk about the area near Kellogg, right? This is the area here?
Exactly.
Why we have to merge them is that it's just for the simple, I don't want to say simple, but just from the geometric standpoint. If we have 2 lanes on northbound Alma at grade, and we're adding a 3rd northbound Alma lane from Churchill, from the underpass, then we're taking 3 lanes. We're trying to force 3 lanes into 2, which are existing today down here near Melville. So we have to get the 3 lanes down to 2 before Melville.
Why wouldn't we want that centermost lane that's coming from the underpass or the dugout area? Why wouldn't we want that one to be the one that merges in?
That could be just from a traffic safety standpoint. You usually want to have the lanes merging from the right, just what drivers are most used to. But we don't have to do it that way. That's, as I said, maybe that's something that you'd engage Gary.
Yeah, that's really my takeaway here is just be creative about that. If there's another way or a safer way, I think that keeping that traffic, those 2 lanes flowing north would be something where we could anticipate hearing from the community. And since we did have space for a center lane before that would be turning left, maybe there's space enough to figure that out in a more clever way. That's not to say this isn't great. I really love what's done, and I think it's wonderful.
Sure.
The move to Kellogg is really good too. So thank you.
That's
a good question. Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
It should also just remind us all that those 2 lanes actually currently merge to 1, just a little further beyond that as it approaches the bridge over Embarcadero. And this design does not anticipate widening that bridge over Embarcadero.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Ed. I wasn't sure exactly where that merge happened. Is it after Melville?
Just past Melville, yes.
So this would just be changing where that merge to 1 happens?
Yes. Well, it has to integrate with that merge to 1.
I think that could work in that case. I think we just want to make sure that that the story that we communicate to the community, is coherent and that makes sense, and that we don't exacerbate traffic concerns.
Yeah, and keep in mind too that the traffic on these 2 northbound lanes would be less than they are today because all the traffic from Churchill, from eastbound Churchill, I should say, will be in this 3rd lane.
And that's longer than the current stacking lane, right?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
There's a current left turn lane. It's not long enough to contain the queue at Churchill, and it looks like the way that we've drawn this, it will be longer.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so that could have an advantage to traffic flow as well.
Right. That's a good point. I don't recall offhand how much longer this is. It's probably, I'd have to look at that.
I was thinking about the one in Alma too. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Carrie. Okay, so we'll have Tony and then Phil and then Inyoung and then Keith.
So most of my questions have been answered. I just wanted to drill in on the cost. The 150 million seems a little low compared with Meadow and Charleston, but I'll leave that to you. I also wanted to thank you guys. This has made it very, very clear about what this alternative is about. The one remaining question I have is regarding the bike tunnel. There is a path at Embarcadero that goes under, and this one seems pretty close to that one. Do we really need it here, or do we need it at Coleridge more? It seems to me that there's an underserved bike area to school around the Coleridge area, south of Churchill. And I'm wondering why you decided to put it at Kellogg versus the other one.
Yeah, I maybe let the city chime in on this too, but Kellogg, I think, was originally conceived by 2 bikes, And that location kind of makes sense because on the west side of the tracks, you have a place to have these ramps open up parallel to the bike path of the school. And I don't think they'd have that luxury at Coleridge.
That's true. It seems to me that it's really close to Embarcadero, and so I'm not sure.
This is Nadia. If I could, if you look at the way Embarcadero runs, it runs at an angle. So actually anyone who's north of Embarcadero is already going on Embarcadero north. So this is really just capturing the old Palo Alto, basically neighborhood is what you're talking about. And so changing it 1 or 2 blocks in terms of the number of kids who'd be accessing is not a big change because it's not like anybody, it's not that because it's closer, everyone would just go up to Embarcadero. Nobody from Old Palo Alto would do that. They would go to the shorter one, which would be closer. And anyone north of Embarcadero is already taking the other bike path. So there's not really, I don't think there's a lot of.
So Tony, bike path ends on Churchill. There is no bike path south of Churchill.
Yeah.
So there's no room.
Okay, Tony, do you have anything else or?
No, I think it's just well done, well described. Thank you, AECOM.
Great.
And Peter.
Thank you, Tony. Phil, your turn. Phil, you got to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, you had unmuted yourself and muted again. Go for it one more time.
Okay, now okay? Good. Okay, so I'll try to be very brief. First, if I remember correctly, there were some issues or concerns about the turning movement geometries for longer vehicles. Have those been resolved? You know, it's for trucks, buses, that sort of thing.
Yes, they have. We, again, let me share my screen here real quick. Because at first glance, it looks like we have too much pavement here at the intersection. It's really done exactly for the reason you just brought up. This extra wide shoulder here is to allow for like a fire truck, for example, where we used a bus 40 is what AASHTO and Caltrans call it. It's a 40-foot bus, similar to a fire truck. So this extra width, the extra shoulder, all the movements have been looked at for emergency vehicles. That's why there's a little bit extra pavement here. You see at the intersection.
Good.
So second, to clarify though, on that point, that addressing that issue does require additional property acquisition from Caltrain, which is the issue that was raised. So the question as to whether Caltrain will agree to that becomes really acute in order to make this feasible.
Ed, did we ever get an answer though on the fact that that right-hand turn lane that we currently have already encroaches onto the Caltrain right away? And so how does Caltrain's RCUP letter impact our existing road as it is today?
I think that's a good argument as to why an encroachment there is already existing. This does do the same on the south side of the intersection beyond what exists today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, because that leads up to my second question. It's actually several parts. How definitive is that letter? That is this in effect the death knell for this alternative? Or is there still negotiation possible on wiggle room?
I don't you want to field that one?
Peter, I didn't hear what you just said.
I was just going to say, if you want to field that one, go for it.
Oh, sure. Well, I'll give you a perspective. I think that, again, Caltrain staff has staked out a position, and as we would expect the process going forward, that it will be difficult or quite frankly, through a typical design process, we wouldn't get resolution of that question until, quite frankly, the city spends a whole lot more money on this design in order to be able to demonstrate what it truly requires in terms of right-of-way, and then to seek Caltrain's approval of that design. And the dilemma we're in is that we're unlikely to get a definitive answer until we've spent likely millions of dollars on this design. going forward. So that is a real dilemma for us.
Ouch.
Nonetheless, is what it is.
Okay.
And if I can follow up on that, I hope everyone can hear me. The onus would be on the city to show via conceptual designs that a potential future 4-track segment would not be precluded in this area. And that's really the only, I mean, per their email, that's how they would, they say it would most likely be found incompatible. That said, in order to be considered, the onus would be on us to show that it would not preclude the 4 tracks. So we would need to figure that out.
Okay, so that leads to the second part of my question. I'll be as brief as possible. Is it even feasible to, in effect, slide the whole intersection over a little east so as not to infringe on Caltrain's right-of-way? Is that a feasible, is the geometry still feasible? Property takings, not too bad, that sort of thing. I know that may be hard to answer, but I'm just throwing it out.
No, it's something that we've just internally we've discussed, like what it would take to, stay out of Caltrain's right-of-way. And I think we're looking at major right-of-way impacts on Alto. It's already tight as it is. So to try to move the whole intersection to the east would completely change the dynamic of this alternative. I mean, here we have minimal right-of-way impacts, and we'd probably be talking about full acquisitions if we were to do that.
So that might almost bring us back to the alternative that we rejected a long time ago, which was the original idea of an underpass, which would have required significant property takings along Churchill. Or I guess maybe not exactly long, but in that direction. Okay, thank you. Ouch is all I can say.
I would also just acknowledge that since you probably get here as part of your conversation as well, that the answer to that question is a function of things like lane widths, turning radii, and the like. And so the design team has looked at, how much give is there on things such as that. And the conceptual design that you have in front of you does represent the best estimate from the designers to balance the ability to make things as narrow as possible while maintaining some flexibility in order to ensure that you can make the design a safe one, as well as likely to get approval from Caltrain just in terms of their operational requirements and looking at it really from a traffic safety perspective as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so Inyang, and then Keith will be next, and then I see Adina.
Okay, Peter, so I wasn't clear on pumping stations. If we need a pumping station, you need to have some real estate where you're going to build a pumping station. It has to be near vicinity.
It does, yeah. The exact location of a pumping station hasn't been hashed out, but it would have to be near the undercross, near the bridge here, near the low point. So potentially this northwest corner.
We can't see our screen, Peter.
Shit, I'm not, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen here. But yeah, basically on the northwest corner of the school side, that could be a potential location. Everywhere else, every other corner looks tight.
And how big does it have to be, and how high those structures are? And
for another project I worked on, a pump house is roughly on the order of like a concrete pad of like 10 by 15 feet. So not huge, but not small either. We haven't gone to that level of detail yet for this project. I don't want to quote like exactly how much of an area we need, but that was on another project.
Okay.
Peter, this is Eddie. You could probably, as a rule of thumb, you can kind of take a look at the Oregon Expressway. They have a pump house there that can give you a kind of a size. But the other factor with a pump station is that we'd also have to take a look at secondary power in case you have a power outage. What's going to happen with the pump. So that may take more real estate for figuring that out. So it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, that kind of scares me because I see the pumping station near the Oregon, and they're huge. And of course, Oregon is bigger underpath, but it's just very ugly, and it doesn't look like something you would want to see next to school or to residential Anyway, thank you.
Okay, so just time check. It's 6:27. I've got Keith and Adina who have hands up, and then I still need to go to public comment. I see 2 hands up for public comment. If you're the public and you're listening and you've been hanging in there, we really appreciate it. If you could just indicate now whether you intend to speak, that would be really helpful. So make sure you raise your hand. Okay, so Keith, you go, and then Adina.
Okay, Peter, can you share your screen again? If you look at the right-of-way at Churchill, the rail right-of-way, is there even room for 4 tracks right there? I mean, that the magenta line, it looks like you might be able to squeeze 3, but
yeah, there's not room for 4. Let me take this line and project out. So that's roughly where the right of way is. So yeah, we're eating into it quite a bit on the east side of that bridge. So between,
but the magenta line there is so
here,
close.
Just to be clear, you're asking if we did nothing, would there even be room for 4 tracks? So that's what you're asking, right?
Exactly.
Oh, if we did nothing, I think it'd be tight. Yeah, I think there could be. I think this is an 8-foot. In fact, let me.
I think it's 72 feet.
70 feet.
I think it's 70 or 72 feet.
And tracks are typically 15-foot spacing, so 45, 10, and 10, 65 feet you'd need probably bare minimum. 4 tracks. Yeah, let me do a quick measurement here.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. Can they put track right up against the right of way, or is there some spacing they need?
No, you would need to offset from the center of track to the right of way line at least 10 feet, like on the order of 10, 12 feet. And so I'm actually measuring like 60 feet here at this pinch point.
Yeah. I think
maybe it would require some acquisition, right of way acquisition here.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. They would try to make their right of way the same width by taking it on that side.
Yeah.
Good choice.
They would want a little chunk right here.
Keith, do you have another question?
Yeah. Okay. The other thing was about I agree with Carrie's dissatisfaction with the merging. The Embarcadero improvements, wasn't that going to widen the bridge from the current 3 lanes to 4 lanes? This is the bridge that crosses over Embarcadero.
That's right. Those improvements were done as part of the Churchill closure. So those improvements, if the C deems that those would be necessary for any alternative, that certainly could be included. Not even necessarily for this alternative, but just general improvements to the city.
And so if we were to do that, we had 2 lanes that go straight across that bridge, is there any way to keep these 3 lanes together and then merge from 3 down to 2 instead of merging from 2 to 1?
Sure.
Yeah, that Megan, that sounds like a great one to sort of put on the list of things that we'd note that, if you did this, you might need to add some mitigations that were looked at for a closure in order to be able to make some of the traffic stuff work. This is a good example of something that we could capture in the notes that sort of highlights that you're kind of picking from one alternative and putting it with the other one to make something work.
Absolutely. I will add that.
This might be something
I think
staff to take another look at with our team and see whether it makes sense to include the bridge widening as a part of this alternative and the cost as well.
Okay. Last question, Jackbox. That certainly would cut the cost and the duration of construction, I assume, if you were able to get permission from the Jackbox for that.
Not necessarily. I've been hearing mixed reviews on that. I've been hearing from some engineers that it would actually cost more, but that's something I think that we need to do a little more research on because we don't have a lot of, at least not in California, a lot of experience with that. So you probably have to reach out to, like you guys were saying, that was done on LIRR in New York.
By AECOM.
Right. I think we're in CM on that one. So I think to fully answer that question, we'd have to do a little more digging, but I think getting past the first hurdle with Caltrain is really the big obstacle at this point.
Well, and just in terms of the design review process, Peter, wouldn't it, I mean, same answer would apply, that we wouldn't get a firm answer from Caltrain as to whether Jack Box is acceptable until we get into a detailed design and they can evaluate both the structural, operational impacts of the different options.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to that is that they would most likely ask us to do exactly what we're doing now. Show us what it would take to put a shoe fly track here. So by no means is this like effort a waste, because that's what Caltrain would probably ask us to do for a comparison if they were to legitimately, consider that.
Yeah, I agree. But why would it increase the costs?
I think just from the difficulty of the construction, I'm no expert on this by any means, but that's what I've been hearing from some engineers, that I think, Effie, if you could chime in too, I think just from the geotechnical standpoint as well, it's pretty challenging to get the jack box so shallow and keep a live track while we do the jack box.
Was the question the construction of top-down versus conventional is more expensive?
No, I think Keith was asking more about
or jack box.
Yeah.
Oh, jack box.
Either jack box or top down, either of those options. Why would that be more expensive than running the shoe fly?
The shoe fly. Well, most of it relates down to is the windows of construction that you can work in. So if you're doing top-down construction, you're inserting structural elements in between an operational rail. So your construction schedule gets much longer, and it's high risk. As well. The same thing with the jack box. It's a much higher risk because if something goes wrong, you can't restore commuter service is kind of the short answer. But in the cases that we've studied doing that, those construction costs have come in much higher and with much higher risk. So it's typically, we were looking at, for an example, we were looking at something similar on the East Bay for putting a road underneath BART and Union Pacific Railroad. And in this case, BART said the shoe fly was the low risk and that was the only acceptable option for them. So it's so typically it's more construction cost and typically a longer construction because you have narrow windows in which to do those items.
I could see the jack box being the lower risk. I mean, the shoe fly being the lower risk. I can't believe that's the lower cost.
Well, one area that Eddie had explained to us, and I'm certainly no expert in this area, so acknowledge that, is that there is likely some soil stabilization that's required in the surrounding area to ensure that it's stronger. And the jacking itself does also present some potential for geotechnical, basically the dirt being unstable and being shocked to a certain extent through the jacking process itself. And so that can introduce both risks and potential concerns in the surrounding area. So the area of construction outside of the tracks itself is actually also pretty large.
Just to add to that is when you're jacking a box and we're trying to get the roadway not as deep as it needs to be. When you're jacking a box, you actually need more clearance because if you jack the box too close to the rails, you actually can what they call heave. It'll actually cause the rails to distort in the ground. So there's methods that like they did in London, which was ground freezing, which gets more expensive. But that's also the risk with jack boxes is that you're trying to push push a material through, and as you push this through, the soil itself is going to try and move as a result of that. So that's one of the risks associated with the jack box too.
I have a question on that, Eddie.
Oh, can I ask one follow-up question? I mean, jacking the box is one way to get the box in there. The other would be to shut down the rail for the weekend and dig it and place the precast culvert in there. And that would not require any jacking. That would just require the a weekend closure.
Well, it
Are you
requires.
talking about for the ped bike crossing, or are you talking about for the road? You're talking about
The
for the
road.
road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way that can be done in one weekend. It's just it's much larger and geometrically. I don't think you could just put a precast box.
But I thought Long Island, they didn't actually do a jack box in the sense that they slid the culvert over and then so they dug up the rail, they removed the rail, slid the culvert over and replaced the rail on top. Whereas in a jack box, you slide it right under. So I don't think that Long Island actually did a jack box much as a sliding a culvert over.
We can maybe talk with the city about this offline and see to what level of detail we want to dig into this a little bit further. Because I see your point, Keith. I worked on another project where we compared a shoe fly. This wasn't on the Caltrain corridor, but we compared a shoe fly track to a top-down construction, and there was this cost savings for the top-down construction. But it was on a BNSF line where they didn't want to take on that risk at all. So they asked us, like, well, show us what it would take to do a shoe fly. But when we did the cost comparisons, there was savings for top down. So I see where you're going with that.
But there's cost savings and then there's time savings, which also costs us money, right? So I mean, it's also about not shutting down all.
Let me just jump in here and say, in the case of the BNSF, they might have had to shut the line down for a period of time, but they could reroute long distance freight trains on another branch. We don't have that option here.
Okay, Keith, did you have anything else?
Just to add on to that, I was just saying just answering Keith's question about the cost comparison. So I know that's a completely different animal, but in terms of there was a savings for top down on that one. I think that's what Keith was asking.
Okay, it's 6:40. Keith, do you have anything else? And then I can go to Adina, and then I got to go to public comment.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Adina.
Unmuted. Yeah, great. The discussion about the bike circulation was really helpful. And so in putting together tools to help the community understand the implications of the different options, actually a map that showed the bicycle circulation consequences of having the Kellogg path and where that allows people to come from and go to would be helpful as part of the community materials. Then in terms of the right-of-way, is the bike segment on its own, does that have the same concern as the roadway component in terms of whether Caltrain might or might not allow it?
That's right. Yeah, those paths, the ped path that we're showing here. Let me share my screen again. Is inside the Caltrain right-of-way, and we shared this with Caltrain, so they just respond accordingly. The same way that they're potentially wanting 4 tracks throughout Palo Alto. They don't know exactly where in Palo Alto that may be, so they're conservatively saying that these impacts to the right-of-way could be an issue.
Okay, great. So the answer to that question is yes. Thank you.
And if I might chime in, I've been wanting not to express an opinion on this, but the questions about the bike ped circulation really do point out, I think, a really important observation about this alternative, which is, and I can't find a better way to say it, but it actually is really pedestrian unfriendly in that where most of our alternatives are basically status quo as it relates to pedestrian and bicycle circulation, that they can all go where the cars can go effectively. That this one really does have a distinction between the current condition and how a pedestrian would actually cross Alma, a pedestrian in particular. I think the bike here, it has this crossing, but then the pedestrian would also need to use this, and there's no other place to cross such as is currently possible at Churchill. So I think that the discussion is helpful, that we will, I think, want to make sure that that is really clear.
Yeah, and having that illustrated too would be good, including like how far out of the way somebody has to walk to get from here to there. Like both of those things tell people something that's not obvious. Like a small number of people can interpret engineering drawings and many more people can envision it if you actually make it much more explicit about the bicycle and pedestrian paths that are allowed and disallowed.
Okay. Is that it, Adina?
Yep.
Okay. Tony, I see your hand up. I'm just going to ask you if you don't mind holding it until I take public comment, so we can at least let those folks go. And then if we can hang out and keep talking, I can get back to whatever your question was. If that's okay with you? Thumbs up. Okay, great. So Sylvia Starlack, I'm going to turn it back to your fabulous work here. It looks like we've got 5 members of the public who've been very patiently waiting. We really appreciate your patience. And again, sorry that we're going long, but if you've been XCAT meetings before, you know that this is unfortunately how it goes for us sometimes, but we are trying to do the really hard work and ask all the questions. So Sylvia, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Eric Murphy-Chutorian, you may unmute and speak.
Hi there, this is Eric Murphy-Chutorian. Just very quickly, I wanted to thank everyone for the great presentation. Peter, that was really helpful and really useful. The one question I had is actually due to these engineering drawings are a little bit different than some of the early renderings. Specifically, at least if I recollect, there was a pedestrian and bike path to be included on the west side of the bridge that crosses Churchill, so that pedestrians or bikes coming from California Avenue area towards Castellana Mariposa could then come up and share that same bridge overpass without having to go through the traffic light on Churchill at Castellana. Has that been removed from the plan?
So are you talking about a crossing near the railroad bridge to cross over Churchill?
That's correct.
Oh,
On
Peter,
the west
you
side
actually
of it.
muted yourself.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Keep going, Eric.
I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say on the west side of the railroad bridge, there was a space for pedestrians and bikes to also cross without having to go through a crosswalk. So they would be going parallel to the train, but be able to cross Churchill.
I know that was looked at Charleston. I don't think that was ever looked at here. I think we're just tight on space at that corner on Mariposa.
Okay, so it's not.
Are you getting confused with Charleston?
I mean, I apologize if I'm confused, but I remember seeing renderings where there was like, the bridge was a little bit wider on the west side, and there was the ability to come across it and end up. So in other words, we'd have a continuous bike path from downtown Palo Alto to California Avenue by being able to cross without having to go down to the Castellana, pedestrian street crossing.
I don't recall that being done here at Churchill. I know that was considered at Charleston. Because that would require a property take for that parcel in the corner of Mariposa. What you're talking about.
In the technical working group that was brought up, and we thought that it was feasible to have that wider bridge, and then that would allow that bike path to get to the south side of Churchill.
Hey guys, we're technically in public comment, so Eric, we appreciate the question.
Okay, sorry, that's the comment question, and just something to consider as you guys go forward. Thanks a lot.
No worries, but just because also we're pushed on time, but heard the question, we'll try to get some answers for everybody's questions as we move along. Okay, awesome. I think next is Gary Lindgren. Sylvia, I'll let you take that.
See, I have a short PowerPoint presentation. Is there a way that I can show that?
Unfortunately, not at this time. We've not perfected our Zoom skills enough to be able to get that at this point. We would suggest for the future meeting, if you can send that to us, we'll have it distributed to all XCAT members prior. But unfortunately, as part of the restrictions of having these COVID meetings, this is how we just don't have the ability to do that right now.
It's actually part of our Zoom bombing prevention strategy. It unfortunately does not allow us.
Well, okay, can you?
And Gary, if you just email it to either myself or the xcap@cityofpaloalto.org, that is a way that we can distribute it for you.
Okay, I can do it orally. If you can go to, make the full screen smaller.
Oh, we won't be able to do it today, Gary. I'm just saying if you share it with us after this meeting, we can make sure it gets to the Excel.
Well, I can do it early if I can get access to it. It's
no,
behind.
we can't allow that because the timer has to stay up.
Oh, okay, forget it. Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry, hang on. All right, the next speaker is Drew. And Drew, you may unmute yourself.
All right, hopefully you can hear me. So first off, I just want to say thanks for taking public comment. And thanks for the renderings and just this whole thing, watching this process for, I don't know when this started and this alternative. It's just really impressive. When I looked at the shared slides, I was like, wow. I was like, public comment and a public idea and getting it vetted out to this level. It's just, and it's to me, a solid idea, you know, whether it ultimately pans out or not, you know, TBD for some reasons, but it's just, I appreciate all of that. It brings me some faith in the public process compared to a lot of other meetings and a lot of other things I see. So kudos to everyone involved to get it to this point. So, you know, I keep thinking this is conceptual and then we get in real detailed design level questions on some stuff. So I'm going to throw out a couple things just, you know, with the right-of-way things, there's things with the bridge over Churchill, that the bridge on the east side, you know, it's just a very standard bridge. It could be a widened bridge. The span could be widened. And that allows better turning radiuses and stuff. So some of this right-of-way can be dealt with that way. Now it increases cost because of the span, but I mean, these are like design level things, and you've got a conceptual stuff. And then like the bike ped would be another one where it comes out at the Embarcadero path under there and it's down low because of that blind spot and some stuff. To me, that last entrance gets widened out, that first like box culvert there, and or literally the current bike ped right in that area gets put on a little bit of a bridge. And so when you get out on the west side, it's actually, I call it kind of a bubble. It's a bigger area to make the turns and stuff. And so you have right away, you can see people and stuff. So those are just some things that, you know, in that concept, but thank you overall.
Okay. Susan Newman, you may unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so it looks to me like the proposal is dead in the water as long as, you know, Caltrain insists on being able to run 4 tracks through this part of Palo Alto. And I just wonder, when you're following up on that with them, do they realize that the right-of-way, the Caltrain right-of-way, narrows even more at Pierce Park? So if they're talking about running 4 lines all the way through Palo Alto from, what did you say, San Fran, I can never say that, you know what I mean, the creek, to all the way down to Mountain View, they're going to have problems when they get to Pierce Park. And I had sort of assumed that the narrowness there would just preclude this being a location for running 4 tracks. So I just thought I'd throw that out in case it hasn't been looked at yet. Thank you also for doing the great work. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Rachel Croft, you may unmute yourself.
Hi, XCAP. Thank you so much also from me for digging into this concept. There's nothing like actual renderings and photos and videos to show what it would look like. So to me, I love the compromise represented by this idea, but once you see it in the flesh, it really looks like a lot of concrete. And I especially kind of miss all those trees, like as was pointed out as we were looking at the rendering. And I wonder if there's any space along, it looked like possibly along the west side of Alma, between Alma and the tracks, there might be space to regrow a set of trees. So I'm curious about that. And then my second request is same thing as what Eric said. I remember in earlier versions, there was a bike ped path crossing Churchill right next to the tracks on West Side so that bikes and peds don't have to stop at Castellea to cross into Pali. And I do think that for bike safety, you know, we really want to plan Palo Alto, in my opinion. I'd love to see more bike friendly, ped friendly transportation. And I'd hate to cause every single person that's going north-south to cross through traffic instead of crossing over on that west side. So I'd love to have the earlier concepts that did include that kind of a path presented to AECOM. And I wonder if to make room for the path along the property on Churchill, if it could be considered to move the intersection slightly to the north to encroach more on Pali than on the property to the south, to enable crossing on a bike next to the tracks without having to stop in traffic. Thanks.
Thank you. The next speaker. Oh, sorry.
I think that's it.
That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sylvia. Okay, Tony, I promised you a comment.
Yeah, so I sort of align my view with what Ed just mentioned regarding the lesser priority of bikes and peds on this alternative than the others. And so that's, I wanted to comment on that issue. The second one is what freaks me out most about this whole meeting is the letter from Caltrans that Philip read that says that we need to plan for 4 tracks. Or it's a really different alternative. It's a very different alternative than what we're considering. And I'm wondering how important or should we even consider it, or how do we account for this issue?
Thank you, Tony. Ed, did you have a comment before I?
Well, only, I think it was said earlier, but just to reiterate that, I think if nothing else, it reflects Caltrain's perspective that the onus is on the city to demonstrate that it works. And whether it's 4 tracks or any other operational constraint, that, again, they look at this as something they're permitting to happen on the right-of-way rather than their project. So I do think that it just represents the reason that we need to be conservative in our estimation at this point.
Okay, Larry, I was going to ask you, it just because you were on council when we were having the conversations with High Speed Rail and with Caltrain. Is this type of letter something that you've seen before? And do you as a former policymaker just take it as sort of the opening salve of the beginning of a conversation? Or do you take this as, oh, this is dead in the water and we don't speak to it? Like, what's in your experience?
I think it's a little of both, Nadia. I think that I wouldn't regard their statement as definitive, but I think that the financial risk that Ed pointed out is there. That at what point would we get a definitive answer that said yes? Obviously, it would be disastrous for us to spend millions of dollars and then have them say no. But this is ultimately a political question too, not just a design. By the way, there's been talk here that this is the Caltrain is talking about 4 lanes, 4 tracks from border to border. They wanted to have the ability to have 4 tracks somewhere in Palo Alto for passing lane purposes. Maybe Dina might have some more to say about it, but anyway, since it's a political question, if we really wanted to go forward with this alternative, I think that we'd have to put on some political pressure to say, need a definitive answer, favorable one, or well, actually, if it's going to be negative, we'd want that too before we spend a lot of money. So if it's political, then there are a lot of things that are going to be in motion over the next few years, and what we have to say is get our representatives on the Caltrain board and maybe our political clout in the sense of you want Palo Alto voters to vote on your sales tax increase, which whether it comes up this year or down the line. Yes, a hurdle, but not necessarily insurmountable, has to be surmounted early as possible.
Thank you, Larry. So just my quick comment is I would just really encourage AECOM to talk to AECOM Long Island Railroad folks and see kind of what could be learned there, because if there's any way to cut the shoe fly out, even if it's slightly more expensive, if it really cuts down the impact of the traffic and just the effects overall, I think that that's important. Obviously, right now during COVID, we have this weird, really open work windows right now, and of course, none of us are ready to move, nor would we be able to move this quickly. But there's a question of how quickly Caltrain in 5 years gets back to the same schedule they were at before, which means that there may be more work windows available that could actually affect pricing and affect other things. I think it's just something to consider. And I would just agree that we do need to understand, it would be helpful to understand the bike ped routes and the maps that Adina talked about. I think that'd be super useful going forward. So those were just my final comments on that one. Okay, I think we can say thank you to AECOM, and we are now officially at 7 o'clock. So I'm going to move that we, or ask that we defer the XCAP member updates and working group updates to our next agenda, since we have all been sort of dealing with COVID, and from what I can tell, not much has really happened from the groups. And I just want to, that means we'll skip number 6, but wanted to leave number 7 open, which is any other staff updates. And then during that, I also just wanted to make sure that we talk for a moment about the informational reports that were passed out. I just want to make sure everybody had a chance to take a look at those. So Chantal, do you have any additional staff updates?
No, the 2 informational reports is a piece I want to make sure everyone sees. It's follow up from questions that the XAP has asked. So please review those. And if, just review them. No intention for discussion today. And the other item I wanted to point out is I will be on leave for a couple of months. And so Philip Cami will be your point of contact. And that's also important for the public to know. And it'll be on my out of office. So you have continuity, you have a great team, and you'll be in very good hands.
Thank you, Chantal.
Update about staff.
It's great. And as a good follow-up to that, I just wanted to mention that behind the scenes here today, that there's 3 members of the Office of Transportation that have been helping to keep this this meeting running. So just want to thank Sylvia, Nate, and Sarah, who've been in the background helping everything run smoothly.
Yeah, super kudos. Thank you. We appreciate it. I did want to ask, and so I guess Philip, maybe you'll be, your staff will be taking a look at this, but in terms of the XCAP questions that we got, I did have a question there's a question on the game day station. And during our last meeting, I had sent you guys some information about some old contracts I'd found, and I don't see any mention of that in here. So if we could get more information on that, if you got a response on that, or was there some history that we uncovered there, that would be helpful.
Yes, so Caltrain does respond to us. We asked specifically, does Caltrain have an agreement with Stanford for the Stanford Game Day Station? And is that something we can see? And the response was, as discussed over the phone, Caltrain does not have an agreement with Stanford to provide service to the Stanford football games.
Okay, but do we know about the easements that are there and what that has to do with everything? Because that's also a question about the 4 tracks. So just put that in your cap for later. We don't have to discuss it now, but I would just note that that's a question we'll have. Okay, did anybody else from XAP have any questions about the additional documents that were given, or anything else that they wanted to know? I'm not seeing any hands. Oh, go ahead, Megan.
I had a question. I just wanted to clarify. It seemed like what the responses to our question said is that if one of our designs chooses to make any changes to the Embarcadero Bridge, it would automatically result in a CEQA process. So was there more information about that, or was that an incorrect reading of the answer there?
So I'll take a shot at it. I think process is accurate. Finding or impact, not necessarily the case. And so there are means of mitigating any potential for impact, again, based on the aesthetics of the bridge. And so I think we've got some options there, but again, recognizes that in all likelihood, there would be some form of environmental review that would be necessary for that.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. And I just wanted to note, according to our schedule, what is the date of the next meeting is May 6th, is from what I'm looking at. And then another one would be May 20th. The goal was to try to have meetings with less things on them, and which was today's agenda, haha, and still trying to keep it to 2 hours. You know, we're going to have to continue to play it by ear. And I might suggest from a personal planning perspective, think about it as 3. We'll try to stay to 2, and hopefully we'll get better at the Zoom thing and be able to go shorter. But that is the intention, just so everyone's clear. So awesome. Well, Chantal, on behalf of all of us, best of luck to you, and thank you so much for everything. And I don't know if we'll be here in 2 months or not doing this, but if not, we'll be here waiting for you. So thank you, Chantal. Congrats.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. And with that, we are adjourned. Thanks again, everybody. Bye.